I should have never left Sacramento. The comfort of my apartment, the predictable California sunshine, all of it traded for this nightmare in the Oregon wilderness. My name is Thaddeus Wayne Mercer, 34, an IT consultant who thought a solo camping trip would clear my head after my divorce finalized. What a horrifying miscalculation that turned out to be. The rain hasn't stopped for 3 days now, a constant rhythmic drumming that masks every other sound in these woods. Sometimes I think that's what it wanted, the rain as cover. The drive up Interstate 5 had been pleasant enough in my new Silverado, a post-divorce gift to myself. The truck handled beautifully as I crossed the California-Oregon border, the skies still deceptively clear. I'd researched a remote camping spot near Crater Lake, somewhere I could truly disconnect. The weather report mentioned a slight chance of precipitation, but nothing about the deluge that would soon trap me here. I remember smiling as I pulled off the main highway, following increasingly narrow Forest Service roads, the truck's navigation system eventually giving up as I ventured deeper into the Umpqua National Forest. Setting up camp that first evening had been almost therapeutic. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth, the sky turning a deep purple as sunset approached. I'd splurged on quality gear, a spacious four-season tent, portable stove, water purifier, the works. After pitching my tent in a small clearing about 50 yards from a babbling creek, I sat on a fallen log and took a long pull from my flask of bourbon. The silence was profound, disturbing almost, but I welcomed it after months of tense conversations and legal proceedings with Carolina. I woke sometime around midnight to the first drops of rain pattering against the tent fly. It was gentle at first, almost soothing, and I drifted back to sleep without concern. By morning, the gentle shower had transformed into a steady downpour. I made coffee under the protection of a tarp I'd strung between trees, telling myself it would pass soon. Oregon rain was notorious, but rarely lasted long, in early June. I consulted my weather app, but cell service had disappeared entirely. No matter, I thought. I came here to disconnect anyway. That afternoon, I decided to explore despite the rain. Dressed in my waterproof jacket and pants, I followed the creek upstream, noticing how quickly it had swollen with the rainfall. The forest floor had become a soggy sponge, my boots sinking inches into the mulch with each step. About a mile upstream, I found what appeared to be an abandoned campsite, a fire pit with half-burned logs, an empty can of beans, and oddly, a single hiking boot standing upright as if its owner had simply dissolved. Something about it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the rain. I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed danger, yet curiosity pushed me forward. Beyond the abandoned camp, the creek widened into a small pond, its surface churning with raindrops. That's when I saw it for the first time. Just a glimpse, a shadow moving beneath the water's surface. Something large, much larger than any fish that should inhabit a forest creek. I convinced myself it was a fallen branch carried by the current, but deep down, I knew better. The movement was too deliberate, too knowing. Returning to my campsite, I found my tent still standing, but everything around it transformed. The clearing had become a shallow pool of muddy water, and the distant trees seemed to have closed ranks, pressing closer to my temporary home. As darkness fell, the rain intensified, hammering against the tent with what felt like personal malice. I sat inside, my headlamp illuminating the nylon walls, creating a small bubble of light in the vast darkness. That's when I heard the first scream, distant but unmistakably human, quickly muffled as if something had stopped the sound at its source. I spent that night huddled in my sleeping bag, convincing myself the scream had been a fox or some other woodland creature. The rain continued its relentless assault, and by morning my tent had developed an alarming sag where water pooled on the roof. When I finally mustered the courage to unzip the door, I discovered my campsite had transformed into a shallow lake. The truck sat 30 yards away, its tires half submerged in murky water. Breakfast consisted of a protein bar and lukewarm coffee from my thermos as I weighed my options. The rational choice was clear: pack up and leave. But the Forest Service road I'd driven in on likely resembled a river by now. I tried my phone again, still no signal. The screen reflected my face, 3 days of stubble and dark circles under my eyes making me look like a stranger. According to the weather app's last cached update, this storm system was massive, covering most of western Oregon. I decided to scout the access road before making any decisions. Pulling on my rain gear, I sloshed through ankle-deep water toward the truck. The forest felt different now, watchful. Trees that had seemed welcoming just days ago now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching down as if trying to snag my clothing. The road had indeed become a muddy channel of rushing water, with fallen branches creating small dams every 50 feet or so. I followed it for nearly a mile, the conditions worsening with each step. At one point, the ground gave way beneath me, and I sank knee-deep into a sinkhole of mud that seemed to pull at my legs with hungry determination. When I finally extracted myself, I noticed something peculiar embedded in the mud, a gold wristwatch with its face cracked and hands frozen at 3:17. I pocketed it without thinking, a decision I would come to regret. Back at camp, I made the choice to wait another day. Surely the rain would abate, and the roads would become passable again. I spent the afternoon reinforcing my tent, digging trenches to direct water away, and moving essential gear into the truck. As dusk approached, I noticed small items had gone missing. My camping hatchet, a flashlight, a bag of trail mix. I blamed my own disorganization, the chaos of moving things in the rain. But when I found strange, elongated footprints circling my tent, footprints that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as mysteriously, a paralyzing fear took hold of me. That night brought new terrors. The temperature dropped dramatically, and my breath fogged inside the tent. Around midnight, the rain briefly subsided, replaced by an unnatural silence. In that quiet moment, I heard it, a wet, slithering sound circling my tent, accompanied by labored breathing that wasn't quite human. Something scraped against the tent fabric, testing it. I lay perfectly still, my hunting knife clutched to my chest, as whatever lurked outside made a complete circuit of my shelter before retreating with a series of splashing steps. Dawn brought a horrifying discovery. The trenches I'd dug around my tent contained not just rainwater, but a viscous black substance that resembled oil but smelled of decay. Worse, my truck's doors stood wide open, though I was certain I'd locked them. The interior was soaked, mud and leaves scattered across the seats, as if something had been searching frantically for something. My emergency radio, my last connection to the outside world, was missing from the glove compartment. In its place was a small, crudely carved wooden figure depicting a hunched, elongated human form. I spent hours trying to start the truck, but the engine merely coughed and died each time. Water had likely penetrated critical components, though I couldn't shake the feeling something else had been deliberately sabotaged. With mounting panic, I gathered what supplies I could carry and made the decision to hike out. According to my map, the nearest ranger station was 12 miles northeast. If I pushed hard, I could reach it before nightfall. As I stuffed my backpack with essentials, I noticed movement at the forest's edge, just a flicker between the trees, but enough to freeze my blood. Something was watching me prepare to leave, and it wasn't happy about it. I set out just before noon, the rain once again falling in sheets. The hiking trail I'd chosen quickly disappeared beneath flowing water, forcing me to navigate by compass alone. After an hour of difficult progress, I realized I was being followed. The sensation began as a prickling at the back of my neck, then graduated to unmistakable certainty as I caught glimpses of something moving parallel to my path, always just hidden behind the curtain of rain and foliage. Occasionally, I heard splashing that wasn't my own, or the crack of a branch breaking under substantial weight. Whatever stalked me was large and made no effort to completely conceal its presence, almost as if it wanted me to know I was being hunted. By mid-afternoon, the rain had transformed into something unnatural. It fell in patterns that defied gravity, sometimes moving horizontally or even upward in spiraling columns. The droplets felt thicker, almost viscous against my skin, leaving faint gray residue when wiped away. I was lost, my compass spinning erratically. The landscape transformed into an endless maze of identical trees and swollen streams. The growing certainty that I would never leave these woods alive settled over me like a physical weight. Then I saw it, not a glimpse or shadow, but the full form of the thing that had been stalking me. It stood in a clearing about 50 yards ahead, partially obscured by the curtain of rain, but unmistakably there. My first thought was bear, but no bear stands upright at 7 feet tall with limbs too long and too numerous for any natural creature. Its skin glistened black in the rain. Not fur, but something like the slick hide of a salamander. Where its face should have been, there was only a vertical slash that periodically opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The gold watch I'd found was dangling from what might have been its wrist, swinging hypnotically. I dove behind a fallen tree, praying it hadn't spotted me. For 10 agonizing minutes, I lay there, rain soaking through my clothes as I peered through gaps in the bark. The creature remained motionless, its body occasionally rippling as if composed of semi-solid matter. Then, with a movement too fast to follow, it was gone, not retreating into the forest, but simply gone, like a television switched off. I remained frozen, terror holding me in place until the growing darkness forced me to move or die of exposure. I abandoned all thoughts of reaching the ranger station and focused solely on finding shelter for the night. Half a mile further, I stumbled upon a dilapidated hunting cabin, its roof partially collapsed, but one room still offering protection from the elements. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin told a disturbing story. The walls were covered with frantic writings and crude drawings of the same elongated figure I'd seen. "IT comes with the rain" was scrawled repeatedly across one entire wall, the lettering becoming more desperate and uneven toward the bottom. The cabin's previous occupant had left in a hurry, or hadn't left at all. A sleeping bag lay unzipped on a simple cot, a journal open beside it. I picked up the water-stained book with trembling hands, reading the final entry. Day 8. It's taken everyone else. I can hear it moving outside. The rain speaks now, whispers things no human should hear. If you're reading this, you're already marked. The watch is the key. The watch is... The entry ended with a violent streak of ink across the page. In the corner of the room, I noticed a pile of clothing identical to what the writer must have been wearing, but no body. Night fell with terrifying swiftness. I barricaded the door with what furniture remained intact and huddled in the center of the room, my knife in one hand, a makeshift torch in the other. The rain intensified until it sounded like thousands of fingernails scratching at the roof and walls. Somewhere around midnight, the scratching became deliberate, methodical. Something was testing the cabin's structural integrity, searching for weaknesses. I heard the splintering of wood as claws or appendages dug into the exterior walls. Then the whispering began. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon the sounds organized themselves into words, my name, over and over, in a voice that seemed composed of many voices speaking in ragged unison. Thaddeus, Wayne, Mercer. How did it know my middle name? Something I'd told no one in Oregon. The voice began to mimic Carolina, calling out to me in a terrifying approximation of my ex-wife's voice. Thad, please help me. It's so cold out here. Let me in, Thad. Don't you love me anymore? The cabin's single window shattered inward, showering me with glass as a thick, ropey appendage snaked through the opening. It moved with horrible intelligence, sweeping the room until it located me, then lunging with lightning speed. I slashed at it with my knife, connecting with something that felt like cutting through dense rubber. A shrill, multi-tone scream pierced the night as the appendage retreated, leaving behind a puddle of the same black substance I'd found in the trenches around my tent. The fluid began to move of its own accord, droplets flowing together, forming a small rivulet that escaped through cracks in the floorboards. By dawn, I was half mad with exhaustion and fear. The attacks had continued throughout the night, testing different entry points, mimicking different voices, including my parents who had died years ago in a car accident. The watch I'd found had become unnaturally hot in my pocket, and when I examined it, I noticed the hands had moved, now pointing to 426. The glass face had cracked further, forming a pattern reminiscent of the creature's vertical mouth. With growing horror, I realized the watch wasn't just a possession of a previous victim. It was somehow connected to the entity, perhaps even controlling it or tracking me. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the broken window, I made a desperate decision. The watch had to be the key, not just to the creature's tracking abilities, but perhaps to its very existence. I removed it from my pocket using a torn piece of cloth, careful not to touch it directly. The numerals on its face were no longer standard numbers, but had transformed into strange, angular symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly. The hands continued to move, though not in any pattern corresponding to actual time, sometimes spinning rapidly, sometimes reversing direction. I needed to put distance between myself and the watch, but simply discarding it seemed insufficient. If it truly was connected to the entity, it would need to be destroyed or somehow neutralized. The cabin's previous occupant had left behind a rusted toolbox containing, among other things, a hammer. I placed the watch on the cabin's sole table and brought the hammer down with all my strength. The watch face cracked further but remained intact. A second blow produced the same result. On the third strike, the watch emitted a high-pitched whine that made my ears bleed, and the black substance began seeping from its edges. The rain, which had been constant for days, suddenly stopped. The silence was as shocking as a gunshot. Through the broken window, I saw the forest floor steaming, vapor rising in coiling tendrils that began to take shape, dozens of smoky, half-formed figures assembling in a rough circle around the cabin. I had minutes at most before whatever was happening reached completion. I grabbed my backpack, now containing only water, a few protein bars, and my knife. The watch went into a small metal container I'd been using to protect matches, which I then wrapped in multiple layers of clothing and stuffed deep into the sleeping bag on the cot. I burst from the cabin's door into the momentary stillness, sprinting between the forming vapor figures before they could fully materialize. Several reached for me with limbs that were more suggestion than substance, brushing against my skin with a sensation like dry ice. The forest beyond the cabin's immediate vicinity remained enveloped in mist, limiting visibility to 20 feet at most. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, splashing through puddles of rainwater mixed with the black fluid that now seemed to be everywhere. Behind me, a chorus of inhuman shrieks erupted as the entity, or entities, realized their quarry had escaped. The sound was immediately followed by the resumption of rainfall, but this time the drops fell black and thick as tar. They burned where they touched exposed skin, raising welts that oozed clear fluid. I pulled my hood tighter and continued running, my lungs burning, muscles screaming for rest I couldn't afford to give them. My direction was governed by pure instinct now, away from the cabin, away from the watch, away from whatever nightmare had claimed these woods. The terrain began to slope upward, becoming increasingly rocky. The tree cover thinned, offering less protection from the caustic rain but better visibility. About 2 miles from the cabin, I reached a rocky outcropping that provided momentary shelter under an overhanging ledge. As I paused to catch my breath, I noticed the black rain wasn't falling beyond a certain perimeter, perhaps half a mile in every direction from where I stood. Beyond that, normal rain continued to fall. Something was isolating this section of forest, creating a pocket of altered reality within the ordinary world. I checked my compass again, still useless, the needle spinning wildly. But from this higher vantage point, I spotted something I hadn't been able to see from the forest floor, the distant glint of sunlight on metal, perhaps 3 miles east. A vehicle on a road, or the reflective roof of a building. Either way, it represented civilization, safety, and escape from this nightmare. I plotted a course that would take me along the ridge line, staying above the forest canopy as much as possible. The black rain seemed less concentrated here, and the vapor figures hadn't pursued me to this elevation. My progress was agonizingly slow. The ridge was treacherous, with loose shale that threatened to send me sliding back down into the infected forest below. Twice I nearly fell, catching myself on exposed tree roots that felt unnaturally warm and seemed to pulse beneath my grip. The third time, my foothold gave way completely, and I tumbled nearly 30 feet down a steep incline, coming to rest in a tangle of thorny bushes that tore at my clothing and skin. As I lay there, winded and disoriented, I heard it again, that wet, slithering sound, much closer now. It emerged from between 2 massive Douglas firs, its form more defined than I'd seen previously. The elongated limbs terminated in hands that were almost human, but with too many joints, too many fingers. Its vertical mouth opened wider than should have been physically possible, revealing not just teeth, but a pulsating interior lined with smaller mouths, each with its own set of teeth. In one of its hands, it clutched the metal container holding the watch, the lid peeled back like the top of a sardine can. The black substance that composed its body was beginning to solidify, taking on more definition, becoming more real with each passing second. With nowhere left to run, I did the only thing I could. I attacked, lunging forward with my knife. I aimed for what appeared to be the center mass of the creature. The blade sank deep into the viscous flesh, and the entity emitted that same multi-tone scream I'd heard at the cabin. Rather than retreating, it enveloped my arm up to the elbow in its semi-solid body. The sensation was indescribable, like plunging my limb into electrified ice water. My vision blurred with pain as I felt something inside the creature begin to probe at my flesh, seeking entry through my pores. Pure terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I twisted violently, tearing my arm free from the creature's mass along with my embedded knife. Black ichor sprayed across my face and chest, each droplet burning like acid. Through the pain, I noticed something crucial. Where my knife had penetrated the entity, its form was destabilizing, the edges of the wound unable to recoalesce. The creature wasn't invulnerable. It could be hurt. And if it could be hurt, perhaps it could be killed. The metal container with the watch had fallen during our struggle, landing in a shallow puddle where the rainwater and black substance mingled. I dove for it, fingers closing around the cold metal just as one of the entity's limbs whipped toward my face. I rolled aside, narrowly avoiding its grasp, and scrambled backward until my shoulders hit solid rock. I was cornered against the hillside with nowhere left to retreat. The creature advanced slowly now, its movements becoming more fluid, more confident, as if it was growing stronger with each passing moment. That's when I noticed the gasoline smell. In my fall down the hillside, my backpack had torn, rupturing the small emergency fuel container I'd packed for my camping stove. My clothing was soaked with it, the pungent odor cutting through even the fetid stench of the creature. I still had my waterproof matches in a pocket. A desperate plan formed in my mind, one that would likely kill me but might take this thing with me. Better to die by fire than allow whatever was happening to my arm to consume the rest of me. Black veins were already spreading from where the creature had touched me, crawling beneath my skin like living ink. I removed the watch from its container, holding it up where the entity could see it. The creature froze, its vertical mouth opening and closing rapidly. The watch's hands were spinning at impossible speeds now, the strange symbols on its face glowing with an inner light. "You want this?" I called out, my voice hoarse with fear and exhaustion. "Come and get it." I dropped the watch into my gasoline-soaked front pocket and struck a match. The creature lunged forward as flames erupted across my chest and arms. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming my clothing and the spilled fuel around me. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined, but it was nothing compared to the entity's reaction. As soon as the flames reached the pocket containing the watch, the creature emitted a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, a vibration that shook the ground and shattered rocks around us. It threw itself at me, heedless of the fire, desperate to retrieve the watch even as the flames began to consume its own form. We grappled in a burning embrace, rolling across the forest floor as the fire spread to the surrounding underbrush. The creature's body began to blister and bubble where the flames touched it, releasing clouds of noxious black smoke. I was dying, I knew that, my lungs filling with smoke, my skin charring. But I held on, keeping the burning watch pressed against the entity's core. Through the haze of agony, I saw other forms emerging from the forest, similar creatures in various stages of manifestation, drawn by their companions' distress. The watch began to emit a high-pitched keening that rose in intensity until I felt my eardrums rupture. The pain disappeared suddenly, replaced by a strange detachment as I watched my body continue to struggle against the burning entity. The black veins that had spread from my arm were retreating, drawn back toward the creature as if it was reclaiming whatever part of itself had invaded me. The watch's face shattered completely, releasing a blinding light that expanded outward in a perfect sphere. Then, silence. Darkness. The sensation of falling through space. I awoke 3 days later in the burn unit of a hospital in Eugene. According to the forest rangers who found me, a freak lightning strike had started a wildfire that consumed nearly 2 acres before the rain extinguished it. They discovered me unconscious at the fire's epicenter, severely burned but alive, surrounded by a perfect circle of ash in which nothing remained but the charred metal band of an old wristwatch fused to the rocks. The doctors can't explain why I'm recovering so quickly or why my burns, while extensive, aren't nearly as deep as they should be. They attribute my survival to a miracle. I haven't told them about the black veins that sometimes appear beneath my skin when the hospital room is dark, or about the dreams, vivid dreams of rain that falls upward and whispers my name. I haven't told them that sometimes, in the reflection of the hospital window at night, my eyes appear as vertical slits, or that I've developed a craving for rare meat that borders on obsession. They're releasing me tomorrow. My ex-wife Carolina is flying up from Sacramento to drive me back, a gesture of reconciliation prompted by my accident. She doesn't know that I've booked 2 tickets on a flight leaving Eugene the day after. One for me, one for whatever is growing inside me. The rainforests of Brazil seem like an appropriate place to release it. Somewhere remote, somewhere primal, somewhere the rain never stops. I've purchased a new watch, an expensive gold timepiece with a custom face. Instead of numbers, it features symbols I've drawn from memory, symbols that writhe and shift when no one else is looking. Sometimes, I catch orderlies or nurses staring at it, their expressions blank, their pupils dilating until their eyes are nothing but black pools. I know now what the cabin journal meant. The watch is the key, not just to summoning them, but to becoming them. The transformation is slow, gradual, almost pleasant in its inevitability. Soon, I'll shed this damaged human shell like an outgrown suit. Soon, I'll return to Oregon, to those woods near Crater Lake, bringing the gift of evolution to others seeking solitude. The rain will speak with my voice. The forest will move with my purpose. And occasionally, a lone camper will find a gold watch, its hands frozen at a time that doesn't exist, and the cycle will begin anew. So if you're planning a camping trip to Oregon and the forecast calls for rain, reconsider. That isn't water falling from the sky. That's me coming home. Man, if I'd known how this trip was going to turn out, I'd have stayed home in Boise with a beer and a blanket. I'm Torrin James Adler, 32 years old, born and raised in Idaho's dry, sunny sprawl. I've always been the outdoorsy type. Hiking, fishing, you name it. But Oregon? That's a whole different beast. I'd heard the stories about its endless forests and moody weather, but I figured a camping trip in the rain couldn't be that bad, right? Famous last words. I packed up my Silverado, my trusty truck, and hit the road, chasing some dumb idea of peace and quiet in the wild. The drive was long, and by the time I rolled into the edges of Tillamook State Forest, the sky was already weeping gray sheets of water. I'm not gonna lie, I was kinda stoked at first. I mean, I'd been cooped up in Boise too long, working my boring warehouse job, forklifting crates of who knows what. My buddies always said I needed to get out more, so here I was, proving them right. I'd picked this spot off some random camping forum, said it was remote, scenic, perfect for a solo trip. The rain was coming down hard as I pulled off Highway 6, my truck rumbling over a muddy gravel road. I had my gear in the back, tent, cooler, a beat-up guitar I barely knew how to play. Figured I'd strum a few chords by the fire, you know, real rugged-like. The forest swallowed me up quick. Tall pines loomed over the road, their branches drooping under the weight of the rain. I'd read Tillamook was huge, thousands of acres, and it felt like it. No cell signal, no other cars, just me and the downpour. I found a little clearing about a mile in, near a swollen creek that looked ready to burst its banks. Setting up camp was a nightmare. My tent stakes kept slipping in the muck, and my boots were caked by the time I got the tarp up. I was soaked through, but I laughed it off. This is living, I told myself, like an idiot. I'm not some fancy guy. Back home, I'm just Torrin, the dude who fixes his own truck and grills a mean burger. But out here, I felt small. The rain didn't let up, drumming on my tarp like it was mad at me. I got a fire going, barely, with some damp logs I'd scavenged. The smoke stung my eyes, but it was something to focus on. I didn't know it then, but that fire was the last normal thing I'd have for a while. The woods were quiet, too quiet, maybe, but I chalked it up to the weather. Animals don't like getting wet, right? My truck sat parked a few yards away, its silver paint streaked with mud. I'd always loved that thing. Bought it used off some guy in Boise who swore it'd never let me down. It had gotten me through snowstorms and desert heat. so I trusted it to handle this soggy mess. I popped open a beer from the cooler, figuring I'd earned it after the setup. The rain kept falling, heavier now, and I watched the creek rise inch by inch. Something about it bugged me, but I brushed it off. Just nature doing its thing. I'd picked this spot cause it was supposed to be peaceful, away from the city noise, the honking horns, the neighbors yelling about politics. Boise's fine, but it's loud in its own way. Out here, though, it was just me, the rain, and the trees. I strummed my guitar a little, butchering some old Nirvana tune, my fingers slipping on the wet strings. It was kind of funny, me out here playing rockstar in the middle of nowhere. I didn't feel alone yet, not really. That'd come later. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the wet air. I tossed another log on, watching the flames fight to stay alive. The rain was relentless, turning the ground into a soupy mess. I kept glancing at the creek, its water dark and churning. Maybe I should have checked the forecast better. Back home, we don't get rain like this. It's more of a quick shower than sun. Here, it felt like the sky was unloading everything it had. I zipped up my jacket, trying to stay warm, oblivious to how scary this place was about to get. By nightfall, I was beat. I crawled into my tent, the rain hammering the nylon like a drum roll. I left the fire smoldering outside, figured it'd die out on its own. Laying there, listening to the water drip through the trees, I started wondering why I'd even come. Was I running from something? Work? Life? Nah, I told myself, just a guy needing a break. But as I drifted off, that creek kept nagging at me, its roar louder than it should have been. I didn't know it yet, but I'd just stepped into something way bigger than a camping trip. I woke up to the sound of rain pounding my tent like it was trying to break in. My sleeping bag was damp, not soaked, but that clammy kind of wet that makes you feel gross. I groaned, rubbing my eyes, and peeked outside. The fire was long gone, just a pile of soggy ash now, and the creek? Holy crap, it was a monster. Overnight, it had turned into this raging, muddy torrent, lapping way too close to my camp for comfort. I scrambled out, my boots sinking into the muck, and realized I'd seriously underestimated this rain. Back in Boise, water stays where you tell it. Here, it's got a mind of its own. I grabbed my coffee pot, figuring a hot drink might shake off the chill, but the stove wouldn't light. The propane was fine, but the striker was toast, probably from all the moisture. Great, I muttered, chucking it aside. I'd have to figure out breakfast later. The truck was still there, thank God, sitting high enough that the water hadn't touched it yet. I trudged over, my jeans sticking to my legs, and checked the tires. Mud everywhere, but it looked drivable. For now, I wasn't going anywhere. I'd come to camp, damn it, not to run home at the first sign of trouble. The rain didn't let up, and neither did that nagging feeling in my gut. I kept eyeing the creek, watching it chew at the bank like a hungry dog. I'd camped near rivers before. Hell, I'd fished the Snake River tons of times, but this was different. It wasn't just rising, it was angry. I decided to move my tent higher up the clearing, just in case. Took me an hour, slipping and cursing the whole time, but I got it done. My hands were raw, and I was soaked to the bone, but at least I wouldn't wake up floating. By noon, I was starving, so I dug into my cooler, cold sandwiches it was. I sat under the tarp, chewing on ham and cheese, when I noticed something weird. The trees across the creek, they were moving, not swaying in the wind, but shifting like something big was pushing through. I squinted through the rain, my heart doing a little hop skip. Probably a deer, I told myself. Or a bear. Bears are a thing here, right? I'd brought a can of spray just in case, but it was buried somewhere in the truck. Note to self, dig that out later. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my sandwich instead. Back home, I'd be at the warehouse now, joking with the guys about the weekend. Here, it was just me and this creepy forest. I started wondering if I should pack up, cut my losses, and head back to Boise. But then I pictured my buddies razzying me. What? Torin, you scared of a little rain? Nah, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Besides, the truck could handle a muddy exit if it came to that. I'd stick it out another night, prove I wasn't some city softy. That's when I found the first real sign something was off. I'd gone to grab more firewood. Dry stuff was a lost cause, but I figured I'd try. About 20 yards from camp, I saw it, a boot. Not mine, not even close. It was old, leather, half buried in the mud like it had been there a while. I crouched down, rain dripping off my hood, and tugged it free. Inside was a sock, rotted, slimy, and stuck to the insole. My stomach turned. Who leaves a boot out here? A hiker? A hunter? I tossed it aside, telling myself it was nothing, just trash from some careless jerk. The day dragged on, and the rain kept hammering down. I stayed busy, rigging up a better tarp setup, but my mind wouldn't quit. That boot bugged me, kept popping into my head like a bad song. I started noticing other stuff too. The creek wasn't just loud. It had this low, rumbling undertone, almost like a growl. And the air, it smelled wrong. Not just wet earth, but something sour, like rot. I laughed it off, muttering, "Get a grip, Torin," but my hands were shaky when I tied the last knot. By dusk, I was beat, but I couldn't relax. I sat by the truck, sipping water. Beer didn't feel right anymore. The forest was dark now, the rain a constant hiss. I kept glancing at those trees across the creek, half expecting to see something staring back. Nothing did, but that didn't help. My fire was a no-go again, so I just sat there, listening to the water roar. I didn't know it yet, but I'd already made my first big mistake, staying. Something was watching, waiting, and I was too stubborn to see the signs. I must have dozed off leaning against the truck, 'cause I jolted awake to pitch black and the rain still hammering down. My neck was stiff, and my clothes were soaked through. Felt like I'd been dunked in a lake. The creek was roaring louder than ever, a deep, guttural sound that made my chest tight. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark like a shaky lifeline. That's when I saw it. Across the creek, maybe 50 yards out, two glints of light, low to the ground. Eyes. Not deer eyes, not bear eyes, but something else. Something that made my skin crawl. I stood up fast, my boots slipping in the mud. "Hey!" I yelled, like an idiot, my voice swallowed by the rain. The glints vanished, but now I was wide awake, heart pounding like a drum. I swung the flashlight around, scanning the trees, the creek, my camp. Nothing but shadows and water. I told myself it was a coyote or something. Oregon's got those, right? But deep down, I knew that was bull. Whatever it was, it didn't move right. Too slow, too deliberate. I grabbed the bear spray from the truck, clutching it like a security blanket. The night felt alive now, and not in a good way. The rain wasn't just falling. It was pounding, like it was trying to bury me. I stumbled back to my tent, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly. That's when I saw the second sign something was seriously wrong. My cooler, big, heavy, strapped shut, was flipped over, contents spilled out into the mud. Sandwiches, beers, a bag of chips, all torn open and scattered. I froze, shining the light on it. No claw marks, no paw prints, just mess. Like someone, or something, had gone through it on purpose. I cursed under my breath, kicking a soggy beer can. Probably raccoons, I muttered, but my voice sounded thin, unconvincing. Raccoons don't flip a cooler that weighs 30 pounds loaded. I started picking up what I could, my hands shaking, when I heard it. A snap, loud and sharp, from the trees behind me. I whipped around, flashlight blazing, but the beam didn't catch anything. Just dripping branches and darkness. My gut screamed at me to get in the truck and go, but I'd parked it facing the creek, now a raging river, and the mud was a nightmare. I wasn't sure I could even get out. Back in Boise, I'd laugh at stuff like this, scary movies, ghost stories, whatever. I'd tell my buddies they were full of it, that nothing spooky ever happens for real. But out here, alone, with the rain turning everything into a horror show, I wasn't laughing. I crouched by the tent, bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other, listening. The creek's roar was deafening, but underneath it, I swear I heard something else. A low, wet gurgle, like a cough. It came from the water, not the woods. I aimed the light at the creek, and my breath caught. There was something in there. Not floating, not drifting, but standing. A shape, tall, hunched, half submerged in the churning water. The flashlight barely caught it, just a dark outline against the rain, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when I looked again, it was still there, moving, slowly wading toward my side. My brain screamed, "Run!" but my legs wouldn't budge. I just stared, mouth dry. As it got closer, the water parting around it like it owned the damn creek. I don't know how long I stood there, seconds, minutes, but then it stopped. Right at the edge of the bank, maybe 20 yards from me. The rain blurred everything, but I could feel it watching. My flashlight flickered, cheap piece of junk, and I smacked it against my palm, praying it wouldn't die. When the beam steadied, the thing was gone. No splash, no sound, just gone. I swung the light wildly, heart hammering, but the creek was empty again. Or so I thought. That's when I noticed the smell, stronger now, sour and rotting, like a dead animal left out too long. I backed toward the truck, my mind racing. This wasn't a bear, wasn't a prank. Something was seriously, disturbingly wrong here. I kept telling myself to calm down. Maybe it was a hunter, some weirdo in a raincoat, but that didn't fit. No one sane would be out in this mess, wading through a flooded creek in the dead of night. I climbed into the cab, locking the doors, my breath fogging up the windows. The rain kept coming, relentless, and I sat there gripping the wheel, wondering what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I sat in the truck, rain slamming the windshield, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. I couldn't shake that image, the thing in the creek, just standing there, watching me. My flashlight was on the passenger seat, flickering like it was about to give up, and the bear spray was still in my lap. I kept glancing out the windows, expecting those glints, those creepy eyes, to pop up again. I told myself I was done. No more camping, no more toughing it out. I had to get the hell out of there, rain or no rain. I turned the key, and the engine growled to life. Thank God for that. The truck's headlights cut through the downpour, lighting up my trashed camp. The tent was sagging, half collapsed in the mud, and the creek looked like it'd swallow the whole clearing soon. I threw it into gear, but the tires just spun, spitting mud everywhere. Come on, you piece of junk, I yelled, slamming the dash. I'd gotten out of worse back in Boise, snowbanks, gravel pits, but this mud was like glue. I rocked the truck back and forth, praying it'd catch traction. That's when I saw it again. Out the passenger window, through the sheets of rain. A shape, moving fast along the creek bank. Tall, hunched, way too smooth for a person. My gut twisted, and I floored it, not caring if I sank deeper. The tires finally bit, lurching me forward, and I aimed for the gravel road I'd come in on. The headlights bounced wildly, catching trees and water, but I didn't look back. Whatever that thing was, it was real, it was close, and it was scary as hell. The road was a mess, half washed out, potholes brimming with water. I gripped the wheel, swerving around fallen branches, the truck fishtailing every few seconds. My heart was in my throat, and that rotting stench crept in through the vents, making me gag. I cracked the window for air, and that's when I heard it. A scream, sharp and wet, cutting through the rain. Not human, not animal, but something in between. It came from behind me, and I slammed the gas harder, the speedometer creeping up despite the mess. I don't know how far I'd gone. Maybe a mile, when the headlights caught something ahead. A tree, huge, sprawled across the road like it had been ripped down. I hit the brakes, sliding to a stop, mud spraying the hood. No, 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 I muttered, staring at it. The trunk was thick, too big to move, too high to climb over with the truck. I was trapped. The rain pounded louder, and that scream came again, closer this time. I whipped around, scanning the dark, but the windows were fogged and streaked. Something thumped the tailgate, hard, and I yelped, spinning in my seat. Nothing there, just rain and shadows. But I wasn't imagining it. The truck rocked, like something heavy had hit it. I grabbed the bear spray, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it. Stay back, I shouted, voice cracking, like that'd do anything. Another thump, this time on the roof, and I ducked, heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the storm. I had to move. Sitting here was a death sentence. I threw the truck into reverse, flooring it, praying I could backtrack to another way out. The tires screamed, slipping, but I kept going, weaving blind through the mud. The creek was on my left now, swollen and wild, and I realized I was running parallel to it, back toward camp. Stupid, stupid, I hissed, but there was no turning around. Then the headlights caught it, full on, no mistake. That thing was in front of me, standing in the road. Tall, slick, skin like wet leather, arms too long, face. I don't even know. No eyes I could see, just a gaping hole where a mouth should have been. It didn't move, just stood there, rain pouring off it, blocking my way. I froze, staring, my brain short-circuiting. It tilted its head, slow, like it was sizing me up, and then it took a step forward. That snapped me out of it. I slammed the truck into drive, veering right, off the road, into the trees. Branches snapped against the windshield, the truck bouncing like crazy, but I didn't care. I had to get away, life or death, no exaggeration. The thing screeched again, loud enough to rattle the glass, and I pushed the truck harder, praying it wouldn't flip or stall. I was in deep now, and there was no going back. I kept the truck barreling through the trees, branches clawing at the sides like they were trying to drag me back. The rain was a wall now, blinding, and the headlights barely cut through it. My hands were slick on the wheel, sweat mixing with the damp, and that thing's screech still echoed in my head. I didn't know where I was going, just away, anywhere but near that creek and whatever the hell was chasing me. The truck jolted over roots and rocks, every bump rattling my teeth, but I couldn't slow down. Not with that horror behind me. I thought I'd made it when the trees started thinning out. The ground leveled, and I caught a glimpse of gravel, maybe a side road. I yanked the wheel, aiming for it, my breath hitching with hope. Big mistake. The tires hit a slick patch, and the truck slid hard, fishtailing into a ditch I hadn't seen. Metal crunched, glass shattered. The passenger window blew out, and I slammed forward, my head smacking the steering wheel. Everything went fuzzy, warm blood trickling down my face. I groaned, dazed, trying to blink the world back into focus. The engine was dead. I turned the key, nothing but a weak click. "Come on," I pleaded, smacking the dash, but it was done. Rain poured in through the broken window, soaking me, and that rotting smell hit again, stronger than ever. I grabbed the bare spray and flashlight, kicking the door open. My legs wobbled as I stumbled out, mud sucking at my boots. The truck was nose down in the ditch, useless, and the rain made it impossible to see more than a few feet. I swung the flashlight around, blood dripping into my eye, and realized I'd screwed myself big time. That's when I heard it. Not a screech this time, but a wet, dragging sound. Close. Too close. I spun, beam shaking, and there it was, emerging from the trees, lurching toward me. That slick, eyeless thing, its long arms swaying, mouth gaping like it was tasting the air. I sprayed the bear spray, a wild shot, but the wind and rain just blew it back in my face. I coughed, eyes burning, and bolted, half blind, into the dark. My head throbbed, my lungs screamed, but I ran anyway, tripping over roots, the forest a blurry nightmare. I don't know how long I ran. Felt like forever. The rain kept coming, relentless, and that dragging sound followed, slow but steady. I stumbled into a clearing, gasping, and saw lights, faint, flickering, maybe a house. I pushed toward it, hope flaring, but my foot caught on something, a root, a rock, I don't know, and I went down hard. My flashlight flew, landing yards away, its beam pointing back at me, and in that light I saw it. Not one, but two of them now, looming over me, their shapes distorted by the rain. My scream died in my throat. I scrambled back, hands clawing at the mud, but they were fast, faster than before. One grabbed my leg, its grip cold and slimy, yanking me like I weighed nothing. I kicked, flailing, but the other one lunged, pinning my arms. Up close, they were worse, skin peeling, mouths dripping something black and thick. I thrashed, yelling for help. But who was going to hear me out here? The rain drowned everything, and those lights, my last shot, faded as they dragged me back toward the trees. I'd made a deadly mistake, thinking I could outrun this. They pulled me deeper, the ground turning soft and swampy, the creek's roar growing loud again. I fought till my strength gave out, but it didn't matter. The last thing I saw was that water, dark, churning, alive, rising up to meet me. I'd come to Oregon for peace, a dumb break from Boise, and now it was swallowing me whole. The tragedy wasn't just dying out here. It was knowing I'd never get to warn anyone else. Those things, whatever they were, weren't done. They'd wait, patient, for the next fool to roll into Tillamook with a tent and a dream. I blacked out as the cold closed in, the rain still pounding, a cruel lullaby. Maybe someone will find the truck someday, half buried, a rusty relic, and wonder what happened. They won't know the half of it. I messed up, stayed too long, and paid for it. Out here, the forest doesn't forgive, and neither do the things that call it home. If you're ever in Oregon, stuck in the rain, don't stop. Keep driving. Trust me, I wish I had. I should have known better than to think Oregon would give me anything but regret. Soaked, bone-chilling regret. I'm Faye Calloway, 29, from Spokane, Washington, where the air's crisp and the rain doesn't try to drown you every damn day. I've always been the restless type, bartending nights, hiking days, chasing something I can't quite name. This time, it was a camping trip in the Siuslaw National Forest, just off the coast. I'd borrowed my sister's RAV4, her prized SUV, and packed it with gear, dreaming of ocean views and solitude. Big mistake, but I didn't see it coming yet. The drive from Spokane was brutal, 7 hours of podcasts and gas station coffee, the windshield wipers slapping nonstop by the time I hit Oregon. I'd picked Siuslaw cause it sounded wild, rugged cliffs, dense woods, waves crashing nearby. Perfect for a reset after too many late shifts pouring beers for loudmouths. I rolled in late, the SUV's tires crunching over wet gravel near Hebo, a nowhere town swallowed by trees. Rain was already pelting down, turning the dirt road into a slushy mess as I found a spot by the South Fork Wilson River. Setting up camp was a fight. The wind off the coast yanked at my tent, and the rain soaked me through before I even got the poles up. I'm no stranger to roughing it. Spokane's got its share of backcountry, but this felt personal, like the weather was mad I'd shown up. My boots squished with every step, and my hands were numb tying down the tarp. I kept muttering, "You wanted this, June," like it'd make me feel better. It didn't. The river was close, rushing loud and dark, swollen from days of downpour. I'm not some high-maintenance chick. Back home, I'm the one fixing leaky faucets and hauling firewood. But out here, I felt out of my depth. The forest was thick, dripping, alive with that heavy silence only rain can bring. I got a fire going, barely, using some soggy pine and a lighter I'd smartly kept dry. The flames sputtered, but it was something. I cracked a can of soup from my stash, heating it over the pitiful blaze, and tried to enjoy the moment. The SUV sat parked nearby, my lifeline if things got dicey. The rain didn't quit, hammering the tarp like it wanted in. I'd heard Siuslaw was moody. Locals in Hebo had warned me about flash floods, but I figured I'd be fine up on this little rise. I sipped my soup, watching the river churn, its banks looking softer every minute. I'd always loved water, lakes, streams, even the Spokane River, but this felt different. Too wild, too hungry. I shook it off, chalking it up to being tired. I wasn't wrong, just clueless. I'd come here to unplug, to ditch the bar noise and the customers who think one more round means 10. Spokane's got its charm, but it's crowded in a sneaky way. Too many voices, too many expectations. Out here, it was just me, the rain, and the woods. I pulled out my sketchbook. Yeah, I doodle when I'm bored, and scratched out a few lines of the riverbank. The pencil slipped on the damp page, but it kept me busy. I didn't notice how dark it had gotten, how the fire was the only light left. Night crept in fast, the rain a constant roar. I zipped up my jacket, huddling by the fire, and listened to the river growl. It was louder than it should have been, but I told myself it was normal. Coastal rivers swell, right? I'd camped near water plenty of times. I knew the drill. Still, something nagged at me, a twitch in my gut I couldn't pin down. I glanced at the SUV, its outline blurry through the downpour, and figured I'd crash there if the tent got too wet. Good plan, in theory. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, I was beat. The tent shook with every gust, rain pooling in the corners, but I was too stubborn to move yet. I left the fire dying outside, its smoke curling into the wet air. Laying there, the river's rumble mixing with the storm, I started second-guessing this whole trip. Was I running from something? Work? Life? Myself? Nah, just needed a break, I decided. But as I drifted off, that river kept tugging at my mind, its voice too alive, too close. I had no idea what I'd stumbled into. I woke up to water dripping on my face, cold, insistent, like the rain was mocking me. My sleeping bag was soggy, and the tent floor felt like a sponge. I sat up, groaning, and saw why. The corner stakes had pulled loose overnight, letting the storm sneak in. Perfect, I grumbled, wiping my eyes. Outside, the rain was still pounding, and the river sounded like a freight train. I peeked through the flap. Holy crap, it was high, lapping at the edge of my little rise. Back in Spokane, I'd have laughed this off, but here it felt scary, like nature was flexing on me. I crawled out, my boots sinking into mud that wasn't there last night. The fire was a lost cause, just a puddle of ash now, and my tarp was flapping like a wounded bird. I yanked it down, swearing under my breath, and started packing up the wet mess. The SUV was still parked where I'd left it, thank God, but the ground around it looked soft, slick. I'd have to be careful driving out. No way I was staying here with that river eyeing my camp like a snack. I'd move inland, find higher ground. Dragging my gear to the SUV took forever. My hands were pruned, my jacket useless, and the wind kept shoving me sideways. I kept glancing at the river, its water dark and frothy, chunks of debris spinning in the current. It wasn't just rising, it was pissed. I'd seen floods on TV, like that one in Portland a few years back, houses floating away. This felt like that, but personal. I tossed the last bag in the back, slamming the hatch, and decided to scout the area before I bolted. Dumb move, but I wasn't thinking straight. I trudged up a little hill behind camp, rain stinging my face, to get a better look. The forest was a wall of green and gray, dripping and swaying, and the coast wasn't far, maybe a mile west. I could hear waves crashing under the storm's roar, but something else caught my ear. A low hum, almost a moan, coming from the trees downhill. I froze, squinting through the downpour. Probably just the wind, right? I'd heard spooky noises hiking near Spokane, branches rubbing, air whistling. But this felt off, too steady, too alive. Shaking it off, I headed back to the SUV. That's when I found the first real hint something was wrong. My sketchbook, left in the tent last night, was lying in the mud, pages ripped out, scattered like confetti. I crouched, picking up a soggy sheet, my river drawing, torn in half. My stomach twisted. The wind couldn't do that. It had been zipped inside. I scanned the clearing, rain blurring everything, but nothing moved. Raccoons, I muttered, half laughing. Yeah, right. Even I didn't buy that. I stuffed the ruined pages in my pocket and climbed into the SUV, locking the doors. The engine purred to life. Bless my sister's taste in cars, and I cranked the heat, shivering as it kicked in. I could head back to Hebo, call it quits, but I'd driven 7 hours for this. My pride stung at the thought of bailing so soon. Besides, the bartender in me hated wasting a night off. I decided to find a new spot, higher, drier, away from that damn river. I'd tough it out, prove I wasn't some lightweight. The rain kept hammering, and that hum came again, louder, closer, vibrating through the glass. I turned the radio on, static crackling, hoping to drown it out. No stations, just noise. I gripped the wheel, peering through the streaked windshield. The trees looked wrong, too still for all this wind. My gut churned, but I brushed it off as nerves. I'd dealt with rowdy drunks back home. I could handle a little rain and weird vibes. I shifted into gear, ready to roll, oblivious to how deep I was already sinking. By mid-morning, I was bouncing down a muddy track, wipers on full blast. The river was behind me, but its roar still echoed, and that hum wouldn't quit. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the storm playing tricks. I found a new spot, a ridge with some tree cover, and parked. The rain hadn't let up, and neither had that feeling, like I'd kicked something awake out here. I stepped out to set up again, my boots crunching on wet gravel, and didn't see the shadows shift in the woods. Not yet. I'd just finished wrestling the tent back up on that ridge when the rain seemed to kick into overdrive, like someone cranked the dial to deluge. My new spot was drier, sure, but the wind was howling now, ripping at the tarp like it wanted to shred it. I was soaked, shivering, and starting to think this whole trip was a horror show waiting to happen. I ducked into the tent to grab a dry shirt, and that's when I heard it again, that low hum. Only now it was a growl, rolling up from the trees below. My skin prickled, and I told myself it was just the storm. Yeah, right. I grabbed my flashlight, waterproof, thank God, and stepped out, shining it downhill. The beam caught nothing but dripping pines and mud, but that growl didn't stop. It was closer, wetter, like something choking on the rain. Back in Spokane, I'd shrug this off. Maybe a bear or a busted car muffler echoing weird. But out here, alone, with the Siuslaw swallowing me whole, it felt scary. I zipped up my jacket, muttering, "Get it together, June," and decided to check the SUV. If I had to bail, I wanted it ready. That's when I saw the first real proof something was off, way off. The driver's side door was scratched, deep, jagged lines gouged into the paint. Not branches, not rocks, but deliberate, like someone dragged a knife across it. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard a thing over the rain, and I'd been right there. I ran my fingers over the marks, cold metal slick with water, and my mind raced. No way an animal did this. Too clean, too high up. I swung the flashlight around, heart thumping, but the woods were a black wall, rain bouncing off every leaf. I climbed into the SUV, locking it fast, and sat there, breathing hard. The growl came again, louder, right outside, and the windows fogged up quick. I wiped the driver's side with my sleeve, peering out, and nearly dropped the flashlight. Something moved, fast, low, darting between the trees. Not a bear, not a deer, too skinny, too wrong. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, telling myself I was imagining it. But then the SUV rocked, hard, like something slammed into the back. I yelped, spinning in my seat, but the rear window was a blur of rain. "All right, screw this," I said out loud, voice shaky. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and flipped on the headlights. They lit up the ridge, the tent flapping like a ghost, but nothing else. Then the beams caught it, standing at the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet away. Tall, thin, hunched over, its shape smeared by the downpour. No face I could make out, just a dark, dripping mass that didn't belong. My throat went dry, and I gripped the wheel, frozen. It didn't move, just stood there, like it was daring me to do something. I've poured shots for drunks who'd stare you down till you flinched, but this was next-level terrifying. The thing tilted its head, slow, creepy, and took a step forward, its legs bending wrong, like they weren't meant to work that way. I slammed the SUV into gear, ready to peel out, when the passenger window thumped. I swung the light over, and there was another one, right there, pressed against the glass. Its skin was pale, slick, stretched tight over bones that didn't fit right, and its mouth, God, its mouth, was wide, drooling something black. I screamed, flooring it, the tires spinning in the mud. The SUV lurched forward, fishtailing, and I didn't care where I was going, just away. The first one darted into the trees, but the second one banged the window again, cracking it. I swerved, branches scraping the sides, and gunned it down the ridge. That growl turned into a shriek, high, wet, cutting through the rain, and I knew I wasn't imagining this horror. My headlights bounced, catching glimpses of them. Two, maybe more, flanking me, moving too fast for anything natural. My heart was hammering, and I could barely breathe. I hit a flat stretch, mud spraying, and risked a glance in the rear view. Nothing but rain and dark, but I wasn't fooled. They were out there. The cracked window let in that smell, rotten, sour, like death soaked in seawater. Something was clearly, disturbingly wrong here, and I'd walked right into it. I kept driving, hands slick on the wheel, praying the SUV wouldn't stall. The rain kept pounding, the shrieks fading but never gone, and I realized I wasn't just running from them. I was running blind into whatever nightmare this forest was hiding. I floored the SUV, the engine screaming as loud as I wanted to, rain turning the world into a smeared mess. The cracked window was letting in water and that god-awful stench, and I could still hear those shrieks, faint now, but chasing me. My headlights bounced off trees and mud, the ridge road barely a path anymore. I didn't know where I was going, just away from those things, those freaky, dripping nightmares that had no business existing. My hands were shaking, slipping on the wheel, but I couldn't stop. Stopping was death. I felt it in my bones. The SUV hit a dip, jolting me so hard my teeth clacked. Mud sprayed the windshield, and for a second, I was blind till the wipers cleared it. I swerved around a fallen branch, tires spinning, and prayed my sister's ride could handle this. Back in Spokane, I'd laughed at her for babying this thing. Now I was begging it to save my ass. The shrieks came again, closer, from the left. I risked a glance. Big mistake. One of them was there, loping alongside me, its long arms swinging, keeping pace like it was toying with me. My stomach lurched, and I yanked the wheel right, plunging deeper into the woods. Branches snapped against the hood, the SUV rocking like it might flip. I didn't care. I'd rather roll than let those things catch me. The terrain got rougher, the tires bogging down in muck, and I cursed myself for not bailing back at the river. The headlights caught another one ahead, crouched low, waiting. I screamed, swerving again, and clipped a tree. Metal crunched, the passenger mirror ripped off, but I kept going. That thing lunged, missing by inches, its claws, or whatever they were, scraping the side with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I was in survival mode now, pure adrenaline. The rain was a roar, the shrieks a chorus, and that smell. God, it was everywhere, choking me. I hit a clearing, tires finally gripping something solid, and gunned it. For a second, I thought I'd lost them. The woods went quiet, just the storm and my ragged breathing. Then the SUV jolted, something slammed the roof, hard. I ducked, swerving, and heard it slide off, a wet thud in the mud behind me. My heart was pounding so fast I thought it had burst, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. I spotted a gravel track, maybe a logging road, and veered onto it, the SUV fishtailing but holding. The rain eased a fraction, enough to see a few yards ahead, and I pushed the speed, tires crunching over rocks. Those things were fast, but I had horsepower, had to count for something, right? I'd outrun bar fights back home, dodged fists and bottles, but this was a whole new level of scary. The road curved, dipping toward the coast, and I heard waves crashing, close now. If I could hit pavement, find people, I might make it. Then the headlights died. No warning, just blackness. I slammed the brakes, skidding, and fumbled the switch. Nothing. The engine sputtered, still running, but the lights were toast. No, come on. I yelled, smacking the dash. The rain glowed faintly in the dark, and I realized I was a sitting duck. A shriek ripped through the air, right behind me, and the SUV rocked again, harder. Glass shattered. The cracked window caved in, and I felt something cold brush my arm. I swung my flashlight, wild, and caught a glimpse of that gaping mouth before it recoiled. I floored it blind, steering by memory, the SUV bouncing over ruts. My arm stung. Wet, maybe blood, but I couldn't check. The shrieks were everywhere now, closing in, and I knew this was it. Life or death, no exaggeration. I hit something hard, a rock, a log, and the SUV lurched, tilting. I corrected, barely, and saw a flicker ahead, lights. A road, maybe a house. I aimed for it, pushing the engine till it whined, the things slamming the sides like they smelled the end. I was getting away, but barely, and the cost was piling up fast. The gravel turned to asphalt. Thank God, and I didn't let up. The shrieks faded, swallowed by the rain, but I didn't trust it. My flashlight was shaking in my hand, the beam catching twisted trees and flooded ditches. I'd escaped, maybe, but it didn't feel like winning. Not with the SUV rattling, my arm bleeding, and that terror still clawing at my mind. I kept driving, praying those lights meant safety, not knowing I was barreling towards something just as bad. I kept the SUV screaming down that asphalt, rain streaking the windshield, my breath fogging up what little I could see. The lights ahead grew brighter. Headlights, maybe a car, and I laid on the horn, desperate for someone, anyone, to help. My arm throbbed where that thing had grazed me, blood soaking my sleeve, but I couldn't stop to check. The engine was coughing now, rattling like it was on its last legs, and I cursed myself for pushing it so hard. I'd gotten away from those freaks, but at what cost? I was a mess, and the night wasn't done with me yet. The headlights swerved, a truck, big and loud, blaring its horn back. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop, and waved my flashlight like a lunatic. The driver rolled down his window, a grizzled guy in a raincoat, yelling over the storm. You okay? What the hell's going on? I stumbled out, legs shaky, and babbled about the things in the woods. Tall, slick, wrong. He squinted at me, then at the busted SUV, and nodded toward his cab. Get in. You're bleeding. I didn't argue, grabbed my bag and climbed up, slamming the door like it'd keep the horror out. He turned the truck around, heading toward Hebo, and I slumped in the seat, dripping wet and shaking. The heat blasted, but I couldn't feel it. Too wired, too freaked. I told him bits and pieces, camping, the scratches, those shrieks. He grunted, muttering about weird stuff in Siuslaw, old logging stories he'd heard. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but my arm said otherwise. It wasn't just a cut. Red streaks were creeping up my skin, hot and angry. You need a doctor, he said, glancing over. I nodded, too tired to argue, not seeing the trap I'd walked into. We hit Hebo, a speck of a town, lights dim in the rain, and he pulled up to a gas station with a flickering sign. Wait here, he said, hopping out to call someone. Cops, maybe a tow for the SUV. I sat there, staring at my arm, the streaks spreading fast. It burned now, like fire under my skin, and my head was pounding. I'd made it, right? Escaped the woods, found help. But something felt off, way too off. The rain tapped the truck's roof, steady, and I noticed that hum again, low, creeping through the glass. My gut twisted. Not again. I cracked the door, peering out. The guy was gone. Too long for a quick call. The station was dark, pumps swaying in the wind, and that hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight, stepping into the rain, and saw movement, shadows shifting behind the building. Hey, I called, voice hoarse, but no answer. My arm was screaming now, and my legs felt weak, like the infection, or whatever it was winning. I stumbled forward, beam shaking, and froze. There they were, 3 of them, lurking near a dumpster, their slick bodies gleaming wet, heads tilted like they'd been waiting. I turned to run, but my knees buckled. Too slow, too late. They moved fast, closing the gap, and I swung the flashlight, cracking one across its gaping mouth. It shrieked, black ooze splattering, but the others grabbed me, cold, slimy hands on my arms, my neck. I thrashed, yelling, but the town was dead. No one came. The truck guy, he'd set me up, hadn't he? Left me here like bait. My deadly mistake wasn't camping. It was trusting I'd escaped, thinking help was real. They dragged me back, toward the woods, the rain swallowing my screams. The last thing I felt was the ground turning soft, wet, the hum drowning out everything. My arm went numb, then my chest, that poison, or curse, finishing me off. I'd come to Oregon for a break, a sketchbook and some quiet, and now I was a tragedy, another fool lost to Sayuslaw's secrets. They pulled me into the trees, the rain a cruel curtain, and I knew no one'd find me. The SUV'd sit there, wrecked, a warning no one'd heed. Back in Spokane, they'd wonder where I went. My sister'd cry over her car, but the truth? It'd stay buried here, with me. If you're ever near Hebo, driving through that rain, don't stop. Don't trust the lights, the people, the promises of safety. I did, and it cost me everything. Those things, they're patient, they're everywhere, and they don't let go. The forest keeps its own, and I'm proof. I messed up, stayed too long, believed I'd won. Now I'm gone, and the rain's still falling, washing away what's left of fake Callaway. If I'd known the rain would turn into my personal nightmare, I'd have stayed in Bend with my dog and a pizza. I'm Soren Elias Voss, 35, born and bred in Central Oregon where the sun at least pretends to care. I'm a mechanic by trade, grease under my nails, always tinkering with something, and I figured a solo camping trip would fix the restlessness I'd been lugging around. So, I loaded up my F-150, my pride and joy, rebuilt from a junker, and pointed it west toward the Umpqua National Forest. Rain was in the forecast, but I didn't think it'd be this bad. The drive from Bend was a slog, 4 hours of twisting roads, the truck's wipers working overtime as the sky opened up. I'd picked Umpqua cause it's got everything, rivers, waterfalls, woods so thick you can lose yourself. I needed that, a break from the shops clanging and customers whining about oil changes. By the time I hit a back road near Diamond Lake, the rain was a curtain, drumming the roof like it was mad I'd shown up. I found a pull-off by the North Umpqua River, tires crunching wet gravel, and figured it'd do. Setting up camp was a disaster. The wind yanked at my tent, the ground was a sponge, and my boots were soaked before I got the stakes in. I'm used to roughing it. Bend's got its wild spots, but this rain felt alive, like it was daring me to quit. I strung up a tarp, hands numb, and got a fire going with some damp wood I'd scavenged. The flames hissed, barely hanging on, but it was something. I leaned against the truck, sipping a coffee from my thermos, watching the river rush by. Dark, swollen, louder than I'd expected. I'm not some soft city guy. Back home, I'm the one pulling buddies' rigs out of snowdrifts and grilling elk I hunted myself. But out here, I felt off balance. The forest loomed, dripping and dense, and the rain didn't let up, turning everything slick and gray. I'd brought a fishing rod. Thought I'd try my luck in the river, but it stayed in the truck. Something about the water bugged me. Too fast, too wild. I shrugged it off, blaming the weather, and cracked a beer instead, figuring I'd earned it. The spot was remote. No cell signal, no other campers, just me and the storm. I'd wanted quiet, and I got it. Too much, maybe. Ben's got its noise, trucks rumbling, bar chatter, but it's home. Here, the silence under the rain was heavy, pressing in. I kicked back under the tarp, watching the fire sputter, and tried to relax. The river kept roaring, its banks soft and crumbling, and I wondered if I'd parked too close. Nah, I told myself I'd be fine. Famous last words. I'd come out here to clear my head. Work had been a grind, and my ex kept texting about stuff I didn't want to deal with. Umpqua seemed like the fix. Nature, solitude, a reset. I pulled out my pocket knife, whittling a stick to pass the time, something I'd done since I was a kid. The rain made it tricky, with slippery, but it kept my hands busy. The fire flickered, smoke curling into the wet air, and I didn't notice how dark it had gotten, how the trees seemed to lean in closer. Night hit fast, the rain a steady growl. I zipped my jacket tighter, huddling by the fire, and listened to the river churn. It was louder now, angrier, but I figured that's just how it goes out here. Rivers swell, no big deal. I'd camped near water plenty, Crane Prairie, the Deschutes, but this felt different, restless. I glanced at the truck, its outline blurry through the downpour, my safety net if the tent flooded. Solid plan, I thought, missing the first hints of trouble brewing. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, I was beat. The tent shook with every gust, rain pooling at the edges, but I was too stubborn to move yet. I left the fire dying outside, its glow fading fast. Laying there, the river's rumble mixing with the storm, I started wondering why I'd even come. Was I running from Ben, from myself? Nah, just a guy needing a breather, I decided. But as I drifted off, that water kept gnawing at me. Too loud, too close. I had no clue what I'd rolled into. I woke up to the truck rocking, wind, I figured, till I realized I'd crashed in the tent, not the cab. My eyes snapped open, rain hammering the nylon, and I felt it again, a jolt, sharp and heavy. I scrambled up, heart kicking, and unzipped the flap. The storm was a beast now, the river a roaring mess just yards away, chewing at the bank like it wanted my camp for breakfast. My fire was gone, drowned out, and the tarp was flapping loose, half torn. Ah, hell, I muttered, stumbling out into the muck, boots sinking deep, rain soaking me through. The truck was still there, thank God, but the ground around it was a swamp, tires half buried in mud. I cursed myself for not moving it last night. Back in Bend, I'd have known better. The river was too damn close, its water dark and churning, spitting foam. I grabbed my gear, tossing it into the cab, wet sleeping bag, soggy pack, the works. No way I was staying here. I'd find higher ground or bail back to civilization. I wasn't about to let the Umpqua turn my trip into a horror show, or so I thought. Packing up was a fight. The wind kept yanking the tent, stakes pulling free like the ground was giving up. My hands were numb, fumbling with ropes, and I kept eyeing the river. It was rising fast, too fast. I'd seen floods before, spring runoff near the Deschutes, but this felt mean, personal. I hauled the last of it to the truck, my breath puffing in the cold, and climbed in to warm up. The engine growled awake, heat blasting, and I sat there, dripping, trying to figure my next move. Stay or go. Pride said stay, don't let a little rain win, but my gut was screaming otherwise. I decided to scout first, see if the road out was still good. I grabbed my flashlight and a crowbar from the toolbox, better safe than sorry, and trudged up the track. The rain stung my face, the beam bouncing off wet trees, and that's when I heard it, a low, gurgling rasp cutting through the storm. Not the river, not the wind, something else. I froze, swinging the light around. Nothing but shadows and water. Get a grip, Soren, I muttered, chalking it up to exhaustion. Ben's got its creepy nights, but this felt off. That's when I found the first sign something was wrong, real wrong. Halfway up the road, stuck in the mud, was a glove, old, leather, fingers curled like it had been dropped mid-run. I crouched, rain dripping off my hood, and nudged it with the crowbar. It was heavy, soaked, and inside, God help me, was a smell, faint but sour, like rot. My stomach flipped. Who loses a glove out here? A hiker? A hunter? I tossed it aside, telling myself it was nothing, just trash. But my hands were shaky when I stood up, and that rasp came again, closer. I hightailed it back to the truck, the road still passable, barely. Mud sucked at my boots, and the river's roar was deafening, like it was laughing at me. I could head back to Diamond Lake, call it quits, but I'd rebuilt that truck with my own hands. Pride's a stubborn bastard. I decided to move camp instead, higher, away from the water. I'd tough it out, prove I wasn't scared off by a little weirdness. Back in the cab, I cranked the heat again, wiping mud off my face, and tried to shake that glove from my mind. It wouldn't budge. The rain kept pounding, and that rasp turned into a hum. Low, steady, creeping through the glass. I turned the radio on, static, no signal, and cranked it anyway, drowning out the noise. The trees looked wrong, too still for all this wind, and the air smelled off. Not just wet earth, but something sharp, bitter. I laughed it off, muttering, "You're losing it, man," but my grip on the crowbar tightened. I shifted into gear, ready to roll, not seeing how deep I was already in over my head. By late morning, I'd found a new spot, a rocky ledge a mile up, less mud, more cover. I parked the truck, stepped out, and started setting up again, rain pelting my back. The river was a dull roar now, out of sight, but that hum stuck with me, echoing in the trees. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the storm, my imagination. I rigged the tarp, hands steadying, and didn't notice the ground shift under me. Not mud, but something softer, stickier. The signs were there, piling up, and I was too bullheaded to read them. I'd just gotten the tarp tied down on that rocky ledge when the rain seemed to turn meaner, like it was throwing punches. My new camp was holding, barely, but the wind was a howl, rattling the trees like they were pissed. I was soaked through, my jacket useless, and starting to think this trip was a horror movie I'd wandered into. I ducked under the tarp to grab a dry rag, and that hum hit me again, louder, wetter, like something gargling mud. My chest tightened, and I told myself it was just the storm playing tricks. Fat chance. I snagged my flashlight from the truck, big, heavy, good for more than just light, and stepped out, shining it into the woods. The beam caught dripping branches and rocks, but that hum kept rolling, closer now, from downhill. Back in Bend, I'd laugh at spooky stuff. Coyotes howling, wind moaning through the shop. But this was different, scary different. I zipped my hood tighter, muttering, "You're fine, Soren," and headed to the truck to grab my crowbar. If something was out there, I wasn't meeting it empty-handed. That's when I saw it. The first real proof this wasn't just me being jumpy. The truck's tailgate was down, not how I'd left it, and scratched into the paint were lines, deep and jagged, like someone took a claw to it. My gut dropped. I hadn't heard a damn thing over the rain, and I'd been right there. I ran my hand over the marks. Cold, wet, deliberate, and my mind spun. No bear does that, not that clean. I swung the flashlight around, heart thumping, but the woods were a black mess, rain swallowing everything. I slammed the tailgate shut and climbed into the cab, locking it fast. That hum turned into a growl, right outside, and the windows fogged up quick. I wiped the driver's side, peering out, and nearly choked. Something moved, tall, hunched, slipping between the trees. Not a deer, not a person, too smooth, too wrong. My hands shook as I fumbled the keys, telling myself I was seeing things. Then the truck rocked, hard, like something heavy hit the bed. I spun, crowbar up, but the back window was a blur of rain and dark. "All right, screw this," I said, voice cracking. I turned the key, the engine roaring, and flipped on the headlights. They lit up the ledge, the tarp flapping wild, but nothing else, till they caught it. Down the slope, maybe 40 feet out, standing in the open. Thin, slick, its shape smeared by the downpour. No face, just a dark, dripping thing that didn't belong. My throat locked up, and I gripped the wheel, frozen. It didn't move, just stood there, rain pouring off it, like it was waiting for me to blink. I've fixed rigs for guys who'd swear they saw Bigfoot, laughing it off over beers, but this was no campfire story. This was terrifying. It shifted, slow, creepy, and stepped closer, its legs bending backward, joints popping loud enough to hear over the storm. I threw the truck into gear, ready to peel out, when something banged the passenger door. I swung the light over, and there was another one, right there, pressed against the glass. Pale, bony, its mouth gaping, drooling something thick and dark. I yelled, flooring it, tires spinning on wet rock. The truck lurched, sliding, and I didn't care where, just away. The first one darted downhill, but the second one slammed the window again, cracking it. I swerved, scraping a tree, and gunned it off the ledge. That growl turned into a scream. Wet, piercing, cutting through the rain. And I knew this was real, disturbingly real. My headlights bounced, catching them. Two, maybe more, moving fast, flanking me like hunters. My pulse was a jackhammer, and I could barely think. I hit a muddy track, tires slipping, and kept going, crowbar clattering on the floor. The cracked window let in that smell, rotten, sharp, like a gutted fish left too long. Something was seriously wrong here, beyond wrong, and I'd rolled right into it. I gripped the wheel, praying the truck wouldn't die, my breath fogging the air. The rain kept pounding, those screams fading but never gone, and I realized I wasn't just driving away from them. I was driving blind into whatever hell Umpqua had waiting. I slammed the gas pedal down, the truck roaring like it knew this was do or die. Rain hammered the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up, and those screams, God, those screams, chased me through the dark. My headlights flickered, cutting through the mess of mud and trees, but I couldn't see squat past a few feet. The cracked window let in cold, wet air and that stench, like death and salt water mixed, and I gripped the wheel till my knuckles ached. I had to get out of Umpqua, away from those things, or I was done. Finished, no takebacks. The truck hit a rut, bouncing me hard against the seat, and I cursed loud enough to wake the dead. Back in Bend, I'd pulled rigs out of worse, but this was a nightmare. Mud sucking at the tires, the engine growling like it was pissed. I swerved around a fallen log, the truck fishtailing, and caught a glimpse of one of them in the rear view. Lanky, slick, hauling ass after me. My stomach flipped, and I pushed harder, praying my rebuild job held up. That thing was fast, too fast, and I wasn't about to let it catch me. Branches clawed the sides, screeching like nails, and the truck rocked. Something hit the bed, hard. I yelped, swerving again, and heard it scramble, claws scraping metal. My crowbar rolled on the floor, useless now, and I kept my eyes glued ahead. The headlights caught another one, dead center in the path, crouched low, waiting. I didn't think, just yanked the wheel left, off the track, into the trees. Wood splintered, the truck jolted, but I floored it, smashing through underbrush, anything to dodge that freak. I don't know how long I barreled through, seconds, minutes, adrenaline pumping so hard I could taste it. The rain was a wall, the screams a chorus, and that smell choked me every time I sucked in air. I hit a clearing, tires spinning on wet grass, and thought I'd lost them. Quiet for a split second, just the storm. Then the roof thumped, heavy and deliberate, and I ducked, heart hammering. It slid off, a wet thud behind me, and I didn't look, couldn't. I just kept going, praying the truck wouldn't crap out. I spotted a gravel road, maybe a lifeline, and veered onto it, the truck rattling like it was begging for mercy. The screams faded, swallowed by the rain, and I pushed the speed, tires kicking up rocks. Back home, I'd outrun cops in my teens, dumb kid stuff, but this was life or death, no exaggeration. The thing on the roof had dented it. I'd seen the bulge, and my hands shook, picturing those claws. I had to hit pavement, find people, anything to shake this horror. Then the engine sputtered, loud, ugly, like it was choking. No, come on. I yelled, smacking the dash. It caught again, barely, but the headlights dimmed, flickering out for a heartbeat. I was half blind, steering by feel, and a scream ripped through. Close, too close. The truck rocked again, passenger side this time, and glass shattered. The cracked window blew in. Something cold and slimy grazed my arm, and I swung my fist, connecting with wet flesh. It screeched, pulling back, and I floored it, mud spraying everywhere. I hit a rise, the truck bouncing hard, and saw lights, faint, blinking, maybe a highway. I aimed for it, engine whining, the things slamming the sides like they knew I was slipping away. My arm stung, blood, maybe, dripping down, but I couldn't stop. The screams turned desperate, and I pushed the truck till it shook, breaking onto asphalt, sweet, solid asphalt. I didn't let up, tires humming, the lights growing. Cars, a gas station, something human. I'd escaped, barely, but my pulse wouldn't slow. The things faded, lost to the rain, but I kept driving, hands locked on the wheel. The truck was a wreck, dented, scratched, glass gone, and my arm burned, wet with more than rain. I'd gotten away from the great danger, but it didn't feel like a win. Not with that terror clawing my brain, those screams echoing in my skull. I was alive, for now, speeding toward those lights, not knowing I wasn't out of the woods yet, not even close. I didn't stop till I hit those lights, a rundown gas station off Highway 138, flickering neon cutting through the rain. The truck wheezed as I rolled in, engine hacking like it was on its last breath. I parked crooked, tires skidding on wet pavement, and sat there, chest heaving, blood dripping from my arm onto the seat. My head was spinning, those things, those screams, still rattling around in my skull. I'd made it, right? Escaped the Umpqua's nightmare. I grabbed my flashlight, stumbled out, and banged on the station door, yelling for help. Big mistake. I should have kept driving. The door creaked open, an old guy in a flannel peering out, squinting at me like I was a stray dog. "You all right, son?" he rasped, eyeing the wrecked truck. I babbled. Woods, creatures, claws, barely making sense, my arm throbbing hot and wet. He waved me in, muttering about calling a tow, and handed me a rag for the blood. I slumped against the counter, rain dripping off me, and tried to breathe. The station smelled like stale coffee and motor oil. Normal, safe. I wiped my arm, wincing, deep scratches, red streaks snaking up my skin. Not good. He got on the phone, voice low, and I sat there, flashlight clutched like a lifeline. The rain hammered the roof, steady, and my head pounded, harder every minute. I'd fixed worse cuts back in Bend, patched myself up after shop accidents, but this felt wrong, burning, spreading. "You need a doc," the guy said, hanging up, and I nodded, too wiped to argue. That's when I heard it, that hum, faint but growing, seeping through the walls. My gut twisted, and I shot up, swinging the light toward the windows. "You hear that?" I asked, voice shaky. He frowned, shaking his head. I stepped to the glass, peering out. The truck sat there, a mangled heap, but beyond it, movement. Shadows shifting in the rain, slow and deliberate. My throat locked up. "They followed me," I whispered, backing away. The old guy grabbed a shotgun from behind the counter. Guess he'd seen some crap out here, but it didn't matter. The hum turned to a growl, and the windows rattled. I'd thought I'd escaped, trusted this place to save me. That was my deadly mistake. The door burst open, rain and wind screaming in, and there they were, 3 of them, slick and towering, mouths gaping wide. I swung the flashlight, cracking one across its bony skull, black ooze spraying, but the others were fast, too fast. They grabbed me, claws sinking into my arms, my chest, cold and sharp. The old guy fired, boom, deafening, but the shot went wild, shattering a shelf. I thrashed, yelling, kicking, but they dragged me back, out into the storm. My boots scraped pavement, then mud, the station lights fading fast. The rain swallowed my screams, and that fire in my arms spread. Chest, lungs, everything burning like acid. Whatever they'd done, it was finishing me. They hauled me toward the trees, the river's roar rising again, loud and cruel. I fought till my strength bled out, limbs heavy, vision blurring. I'd come to Umpqua for a break, stupid, stubborn Soren, thinking I could handle anything. Now it was a tragedy, my truck a wreck, my blood soaking the dirt, no one left to tell it right. The last thing I saw was that water, dark, alive, rushing up, and them, pulling me under, their hum a sick lullaby. I'd messed up, stayed too long, trusted the wrong safety. The old guy might have lived, might have called someone, but it wouldn't matter. They'd find the truck, maybe my gear, and chalk it up to a flood, a drifter gone missing. Back in Bend, my dog wait, my ex shrug, and the shop hire someone new. The truth stay here, buried in the muck, with me. If you're ever near Diamond Lake, rain pouring, don't stop. Don't trust the lights or the help. I did, and it cost me everything. Those things, they're patient, they're hungry, and they don't quit. The forest keeps what it takes, and I'm proof. Another fool drowned in Oregon's rain. Another story no one will believe. I blacked out, the cold closing in, and the Umpqua claimed me, just like it wanted from the start. If If I'd known the rain would drown more than just the campfire, I never would have left home. That's the thought that haunts me now, replaying like a broken record as I sit here, soaked to the bone. My name's Elsie Marrow, 32 years old, born and raised in Boise, Idaho, a place where the sun at least pretends to care. I'd always been the type to chase a thrill, though, so when my buddy pitched a camping trip in Oregon's Willamette National Forest, I said screw it, packed up my CRV, and hit the road. 3 hours of windshield wipers slapping away later, I rolled into a soggy paradise of towering pines and mud that sucked at my boots. The plan was simple, a weekend of campfire stories, cheap beer, and pretending we're rugged survivalists. Famous last words, right? I'd been itching to get out of Boise for weeks. Work was a grind, and my apartment felt like a cage. Oregon sounded wild, untamed, like it could shake me loose from the monotony. My CRV was loaded with gear, tent, sleeping bag, a cooler stuffed with snacks, and a playlist to keep me sane on the drive. The rain started light, just a drizzle tapping the roof as I crossed the state line, but by the time I hit the forest, it was a full-on deluge. Sheets of water blurred the road, and I gripped the wheel tight, squinting at signs for the campsite. I wasn't alone on this trip. My friend Tavish was meeting me there, hauling his own gear in his beat-up truck. He's the kind of guy who thinks he's Bear Grylls, but forgets matches half the time. The campsite was tucked off Highway 20, a little clearing surrounded by dripping firs and ferns that looked like they'd swallow you whole. I parked my SUV, popped the hatch, and started unloading while the rain hammered down. My boots sank into the muck, and I cursed under my breath. Why didn't I check the forecast? Tavish rolled up about 20 minutes later, grinning like an idiot despite the weather. "This is living, June," he hollered, hopping out of his truck. I flipped him off, but I was smiling too. We'd been friends since college, and his dumb optimism was infectious. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, sharp and alive, and for a minute, I thought maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Setting up camp was a nightmare, though. The tent stakes wouldn't hold in the soggy ground, and the tarp I'd brought kept flapping loose, dumping water on my head. Tavish laughed his ass off while he wrestled with his own setup, but we got it done. 2 soggy tents, a fire pit that was more puddle than promise, and a couple of folding chairs we dragged under the trees for cover. The rain didn't let up, just kept pounding, turning the dirt to soup. I remember thinking it was like the forest was trying to wash us away. We cracked open a couple beers anyway, huddled under the tarp, and toasted to roughing it. The cold seeped into my bones, but I figured it'd be worth it for the stories we'd tell later. Tavish started yapping about some old logging road he'd found on the map, saying we should hike it tomorrow if the rain eased up. I wasn't sold. My boots were already waterlogged, and the idea of trudging through more mud didn't thrill me. But he had that glint in his eye, the one that always dragged me into his schemes. "Come on, June, where's your sense of adventure?" he teased, tossing me another beer. I rolled my eyes but didn't say no. The forest loomed around us, dark and endless, the rain a constant drumbeat on the tarp. It felt like we were the only souls for miles, and yeah, that was kind of the point. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the way the trees seemed to lean in, how the rain never stopped, like it was hiding something. But I was too busy joking with Tavish, sipping beer, and trying to keep my chair from sinking into the mud. We swapped stories about Boise, about the time we got lost on a hike near Lucky Peak and nearly froze our asses off. It felt normal, familiar, even with the weather being a total bastard. I didn't know then that the real horror wasn't the rain or the cold. It was what was waiting out there, watching us fumble around like idiots. Night crept in fast, the kind of dark that swallows everything. The rain turned the fire pit into a lost cause, so we gave up and crawled into our tents. I zipped up my sleeping bag, listening to the downpour batter the nylon, and tried to ignore the chill creeping up my legs. Tavish was still yammering through the tent walls about that damn logging road, saying it'd be epic. I told him to shut up and go to sleep, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like the forest was holding its breath. Maybe it was just the beer or the damp, but something felt off. I drifted off eventually, the rain a dull roar in my ears. My dreams were all water, rivers rising, drowning me, pulling me under. I woke up once, heart pounding, sure I'd heard something over the storm. But it was just the wind, right? Just the rain lashing the tent. I rolled over, told myself to chill out, and closed my eyes. Big mistake. That first night was the last time I'd feel anything close to safe. I woke up to the sound of rain still hammering the tent, a relentless bastard that hadn't let up all night. My sleeping bag was damp, my socks were soggy, and my back ached from the lumpy ground. "Great start, Elsie," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. I could hear Tavish snoring like a chainsaw through the tent walls, oblivious to the mess we were in. I unzipped the flap and peeked out. My SUV was parked a few yards away, looking like it had been abandoned in a swamp. The campsite was a disaster. The tarp had half collapsed, our chairs were tipped over, and the fire pit was a sad, muddy puddle. This was supposed to be fun, but it was already feeling like a horror movie opener. Crawling out, I yanked my hood up and slogged through the muck to check the damage. The rain stung my face, cold and sharp, and I cursed myself for not bringing better gear. Tavish finally stumbled out, hair plastered to his head, grinning like this was all a big joke. "Morning, sunshine. Ready for that hike?" he chirped, kicking at the soupy ground. I shot him a look that could have melted steel. "You're insane. We're drowning out here." But he just shrugged, digging through his truck for a map, determined to sell me on that stupid logging road. I wanted to strangle him, but part of me was curious. Maybe getting out would beat sitting in this soggy hell. We argued over breakfast, soggy granola bars, and lukewarm coffee from a thermos. I said we should pack up and bail, find a diner with hot food and dry seats. Tavish wouldn't hear it. "Come on, June, we drove all this way. One hike, then we'll figure it out." He waved the map in my face, pointing to some squiggly line that looked like it led nowhere. The rain was lighter now, more of a steady drizzle, but the forest still felt oppressive, wet branches sagging low, mist curling through the trees like smoke. I gave in, mostly to shut him up, and we grabbed our packs. My boots squished with every step, and I was already regretting it. The trail started okay, muddy but manageable, cutting through pines that dripped water down my neck. Tavish led the way, chattering about old logging camps he'd read about, how they'd abandoned them in the 50s. I half listened, distracted by how the forest swallowed sound. Our voices, the crunch of twigs, all muted by the rain. About a mile in, we hit a fork. One path went uphill, the other dipped into a gully. The map was useless, soaked through, so Tavish picked the gully, saying it felt right. I rolled my eyes but followed, figuring it couldn't get much worse. Spoiler, it did. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. The gully was narrow, walls of slick rock rising on both sides, and the water was ankle deep, rushing fast from all the rain. I stopped to tie my boot, and when I looked up, Tavish was gone, just vanished around a bend. I called out, but the sound bounced back, swallowed by the drizzle. My heart did a little flip, not full-on panic, just a nudge of something disturbing. I hustled to catch up, splashing through the stream, and found him staring at something off the path. "What the hell, man?" I snapped, but he just pointed, a rusted metal trap, big enough for a bear, half buried in the mud. It was old, jagged teeth caked with dirt, like it had been there forever. "Who leaves that out here?" I said, kicking at it. Tavish shrugged, but his grin was gone. We kept moving, but that trap stuck with me. Something about it felt wrong, like a warning we were too dumb to heed. The gully got tighter, the water colder, and I started feeling watched. Not like some cheesy movie stalker vibe, just this itch between my shoulder blades. I told myself it was the rain playing tricks, making everything seem scarier than it was. Tavish didn't say much now, just kept trudging ahead. We hit a clearing after another mile, and that's when shit got practical example weird. There was a shack, rotted boards, caved-in roof, the kind of place you'd see in a ghost town. Tavish wanted to check it out, but I grabbed his arm. "No way. That's a nope for me." The rain picked up again, pelting us hard, and I swear I saw something move inside. Quick, like a flicker. "You see that?" I asked, but Tavish shook his head, squinting through the downpour. Maybe it was just the light, or my nerves screwing with me, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I pushed us to keep going, backtracking toward the fork. The drizzle turned into a full-on shower again, soaking us through, and my gut was screaming that we'd made a bad call. Tavish tried to lighten the mood, joking about how we'd tell this story over beers later, but his voice sounded thin, forced. The forest pressed in closer, branches snagging my jacket, and that watched feeling wouldn't quit. By the time we stumbled back to camp, drenched and shivering, I was done pretending this was fun. Something was off, and it wasn't just the weather. Back at camp, I was ready to call it quits. Rain or no rain, this trip was a wash. My SUV sat there like a lifeline, keys burning a hole in my pocket, but Tavish was still fiddling with the tarp, acting like we could salvage the day. "We're not wussing out yet, June," he said, shaking water off his hat. I glared at him, dripping wet and pissed, while the forest loomed around us, dark and heavy. The rain was a steady roar now, turning the ground to sludge, and every breath I took tasted like damp rot. I should have dragged him to the truck right then, but I didn't. That's on me. We were arguing about it. Me yelling about heading to Eugene for a motel, him digging his heels in, when the first real sign hit. A scream. Not some bird or wind trick, but a raw, human sound, sharp enough to cut through the downpour. We froze, staring at each other, my heart slamming against my ribs. "You heard that, right?" I whispered. Tavish nodded, eyes wide, and we scanned the trees. Nothing but rain and shadows, but that scream lingered, echoing in my skull. It was close, too close, and it sounded like pure horror. I grabbed my flashlight from the SUV, hands shaking as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the mist, bouncing off wet trunks, but it didn't show much. Tavish snatched his hunting knife from his pack. Overkill, I thought, until I remembered that trap we'd seen. "Let's check it out," he said, voice low. I wanted to say hell no, but my dumbass followed him anyway, splashing through the mud toward where we thought the sound came from. The rain stung my eyes, and every step felt like wading through a nightmare. I kept telling myself it was probably a hiker, maybe hurt, but my gut knew better. We didn't find a hiker. What we found was worse, way more disturbing. About 50 yards from camp, tucked under a sagging pine, was a backpack. Not some old relic, either, bright red, soaked but new, with a water bottle still clipped to the side. I knelt to check it, my light catching something shiny, a name tag stitched inside. Lila M. Torrance. My stomach dropped. "Tav, this isn't right," I said, standing up fast. He was poking around nearby, and then he stopped dead, pointing at the ground. Blood. Not a ton, but enough. A smear on a rock, dark and fresh, rain diluting it into pink streaks. That's when the terror really kicked in. My mind raced. Whose blood? Where was Lila? I swung the flashlight around, half expecting some psycho to jump out, but all I saw was rain and trees. Tavish gripped his knife tighter, muttering, "We need to get back." But before we could move, something crashed through the brush, loud, deliberate, not some deer or bear. I spun, light shaking in my hand, and caught a glimpse. Tall, hunched, moving fast through the mist. Too fast. My breath hitched, and I yelled, "Tav, run!" We bolted, slipping in the mud, the camp's dim outline our only goal. Back at the tents, I was panting, soaked, and freaking out. What the hell was that? I hissed, shining the light back toward the trees. Tavish didn't answer, just stared into the dark, knife still out. The rain masked everything, sounds, shapes, reality itself, but I knew we weren't alone. Then we heard it again. Another scream, closer this time, cut off sharp like someone clamped a hand over it. My skin crawled, and I grabbed Tavish's arm. "We're not waiting to find out. Get in the truck." He nodded, finally spooked, and we started for our vehicles. But the horror wasn't done with us. As I yanked open my SUV's door, I saw it, scratches, deep and fresh, raked across the hood. Not claws, not random. Too precise, like something with fingers had clawed at it. I froze, flashlight trembling, and Tavish swore under his breath. "June, we gotta go now," he said, voice shaking. I jumped in, keys slipping in my wet hands, and glanced at his truck. Its tires were slashed, flat as pancakes. Whatever was out there didn't want us leaving. My engine roared to life, but that's when the lights flickered. I slammed the door, locked it, and peeled out, mud spraying as I swerved toward Tavish. He dove into the passenger seat, slamming his door just as something thudded against the back of the SUV, hard, like a damn battering ram. I didn't look back, just floored it down the dirt road, wipers slapping at the rain. My heart was a jackhammer, and Tavish was yelling, "Go, go, go." The forest blurred past, but that feeling, that scary, watched feeling, was still there, clinging to us like the damp. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, the SUV fishtailing through the mud as rain pounded the windshield. Tavish was braced against the dash, yelling, "Faster, June, faster," like I wasn't already pushing the damn thing to its limit. The dirt road was a slurry, tires spinning for grip, and every bump jolted us like a punch. Whatever slammed the back of the SUV hadn't followed, at least not that I could see, but my rearview mirror was useless, just a smear of darkened water. My chest was tight, panic clawing at me, and all I could think was, we're not dying out here. Not like this. The headlights barely cut through the downpour, lighting up trees that loomed like they were closing in. I swerved around a fallen branch, cursing as the SUV skidded sideways. "Where's the highway?" I shouted, voice cracking. Tavish fumbled with his phone. No signal. Of course, just a dead screen mocking us. "Keep going straight," he said, sounding less sure than I needed him to be. The rain was a roar, drowning out everything, and I couldn't shake the image of those scratches on my hood. Too human, too deliberate. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just some animal. We hit a dip, water splashing over the windshield, and for a second I thought we'd stall out. The engine sputtered, then caught, and I floored it again, mud spraying behind us. Tavish kept glancing back, knife still in his hand, like he expected something to smash through the rear window. "You see anything?" I asked, eyes glued to the road. "No," he muttered, but his voice was shaky, and I knew he was lying. I didn't press it, didn't want to know. The terror was thick now, a living thing sitting between us, and every mile felt like a gamble with death. Then the road forked, left or right. No signs, just more rain-soaked forest. "Which way?" I snapped, slowing just enough to not crash. Tavish hesitated, then pointed left. "That's gotta be it." I took it, tires slipping, and prayed he was right. The path narrowed, branches scraping the sides like nails on a chalkboard, and my gut screamed we'd picked wrong. But going back wasn't an option, not with whatever was behind us. I kept driving, heart hammering, the SUV bouncing over ruts like it was trying to shake us loose. About 10 minutes in, the horror got realer. The headlights caught something. Bodies, 2 of them, sprawled across the road. I slammed the brakes, sliding to a stop, and Tavish swore loud enough to wake the dead. They were soaked, motionless, rain pooling around them. One was a woman, blonde hair plastered to her face. Lila, maybe? The other was a guy, face down, a machete still clutched in his hand. Blood mixed with the water, streaming red ribbons into the mud. "Oh God," I whispered, hands trembling on the wheel. They weren't moving, but something had torn them up. Gashes, deep and ragged, way beyond disturbing. I wanted to puke, to scream, but Tavish grabbed my arm. "Don't stop, June. Drive around." His voice was pure panic, and I saw why. A shadow shifted in the trees, tall and wrong, just beyond the light. I didn't think, just gunned it, swerving off the road to skirt the bodies. The SUV lurched, tires churning mud, and I heard it. A low, guttural sound, not quite a growl, cutting through the rain. It was close, too close, and my skin prickled like I'd been dipped in ice. We weren't escaping a thing, we were running from a nightmare. I pushed the SUV harder, the engine groaning, and finally, the dirt turned to gravel, then pavement. Highway 20 stretched out ahead, a wet lifeline in the dark. I didn't slow down, not even when the trees thinned and the rain eased to a drizzle. Tavish was breathing hard, knife still out, and I kept checking the mirrors, expecting that shadow to lunge out any second. "We're okay," I said, more to myself than him, but it sounded like a lie. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the road signs for Eugene felt like a mirage, too good to be true. We hit a gas station an hour later, neon lights flickering through the mist. I pulled in, killed the engine, and just sat there, rain dripping off my hood onto the dash. Tavish looked at me, pale as a ghost, and said, "What the hell was that back there?" I didn't have an answer, just a sinking feeling that we'd dodged death by inches. The scratches on the SUV glinted under the station's lights, a reminder we weren't free yet. Something was still out there, and I couldn't shake the sense it wasn't done with us. The gas station felt like a flimsy shield, its buzzing lights and stale coffee smell doing little to calm my nerves. I sat in the SUV, rain tapping the roof, while Tavish paced outside, still clutching that damn knife like it'd save us. My hands were steady enough now to text my sister in Boise. "Made it out of the woods. Call you later." But I didn't mention the bodies or the shadow. How do you even start that convo? The clerk inside gave us a weird look when we stumbled in, soaked and wild-eyed, but he didn't ask questions. I grabbed a coffee, burning my tongue on the first sip, just to feel something normal. We should have kept driving, straight to Eugene, maybe a cop station. That's what smart people do in horror movies. Run and don't look back. But Tavish, stubborn as ever, convinced me otherwise. We gotta go back, June, he said, leaning against the truck's slashed tires back at camp. Those people, Lila, whoever, they might still be alive. I stared at him like he'd lost it. You saw them, Tav. They're gone. But he wouldn't let it go, his jaw set, eyes pleading. What if we're wrong? What if they need help? Guilt's a hell of a drug, and I caved. Biggest mistake of my life. So we drove back, me gripping the wheel, and navigating with a gas station map we'd snagged. The rain picked up again, a steady drumbeat of doom, and every mile felt like a countdown. I kept replaying those bodies in my head, torn up, lifeless, the machete guy's hand frozen in a grip. My gut screamed to turn around, but Tavish's voice drowned it out. We're doing the right thing, he kept saying, like he was convincing himself to. The highway faded to gravel, then mud, and soon we were back in that cursed forest, the SUV's headlights slicing through the dark. We found the spot, those bodies still sprawled where we'd left them, rain washing away what was left of their blood. I parked, hands shaking, and Tavish hopped out before I could stop him. Stay here, he said, knife ready, and bolted toward them. I yelled after him. Tav, don't be an idiot. But he was already kneeling by the woman, checking for a pulse. I saw it too late. The shadow, that tall, hunched thing, peeling out of the trees like it had been waiting. It moved fast, silent, and I screamed his name as it lunged. He didn't stand a chance. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, dragged into the dark, knife clattering to the ground. I froze, horror choking me, then slammed the horn, headlights flaring, hoping to scare it off. Nothing, just rain and silence, thick and suffocating. I bolted out, slipping in the mud, screaming for him, but the forest swallowed his name. That's when I saw the blood, his, fresh, streaking the dirt where he'd been. My best friend, gone in a heartbeat, and it was my fault for coming back. I stumbled back to the SUV, sobbing, keys slipping in my hands as I locked myself in. The rain hammered down, and I swear that thing was still out there, watching, waiting. I floored it, tears blurring the road, not stopping till I hit Eugene. Cops didn't believe me, called it a bear attack, said Tavish must have wandered off. But I know what I saw. Something scary, something wrong, and it took him because I made the dumbest call of my life. Those scratches on my hood, they're still there, a permanent mark of my screw-up. I'm back in Boise now, crashing at my sister's, jumping at every raindrop on the window. I can't sleep without seeing Tavish's face, hearing that silence after he was taken. The forest didn't just claim him, it claimed me too, left me hollow, a walking tragedy. I keep his knife on my nightstand, a cruel reminder of the night I lost everything. People say time heals, but they don't know what I know. Some mistakes don't let you go. That Oregon trip was supposed to be a break, a dumb adventure. Instead, it's my ghost story, my regret, my horror, and it's not over. I feel it sometimes, even here, like that thing's still out there, waiting for me to step back into the rain. Some places don't let you leave, no matter how fast you run. That's the thought that gnaws at me now, stuck in my head like a splinter as I sit here, rain streaking down my face. My name's Soren Thane Carver, 29 years old, born and bred in Missoula, Montana, a town where the sky's big and the problems feel small. I'm a mechanic by trade, used to fixing things, not breaking them, but I've always had an itch for the wild. So when my cousin pitched a camping trip in Oregon's Siuslaw National Forest, I loaded up my Silverado and hit the road. 6 hours later, I was deep in a rainy hell I couldn't unsee, my truck parked on a muddy bluff overlooking the Pacific. Missoula was getting claustrophobic. Same faces, same oil-stained garage, same old routine. I needed air, space, something raw. My truck was packed tight. Tent, fishing gear, a cooler of beer, and a toolbox I never leave behind. The drive was fine till I crossed into Oregon. Then the rain hit, a gray curtain that turned the highway into a smear. By the time I reached the coast, it was a downpour, waves crashing below and wind howling like a banshee. I figured it'd make the trip epic, you know? Rugged, real. I was wrong, dead wrong. The campsite was off Highway 101, a slick patch of dirt hugged by dripping cedars and cliffs that dropped straight to the ocean. I pulled my truck in, tires crunching gravel, and hopped out into the muck. My cousin, Lyrian, was already there, her RV trailer parked crooked, lights glowing through the wet. She waved me over, shouting over the storm, "Welcome to paradise, Soren." I laughed, tugging my hood up, but the rain was already soaking me through. She's a free spirit, Lyrian, always chasing some weird vibe, and I'm the sucker who tags along. Setting up was a slog. My tent kept buckling under the wind, stakes pulling free from the soggy ground, and the tarp I rigged flapped like a pissed-off ghost. Lyrian helped, her boots squishing as she hauled rope, cracking jokes about surviving the apocalypse. We got it stable, barely, and huddled under her RV's awning with a couple beers. The rain pounded the metal, a steady thrum, and the ocean roared below, dark and restless. It felt alive out there, almost too alive, like it was sizing us up. Lyrian started spinning tales about the coast, shipwrecks, ghost towns, folks who vanished in storms like this. "They say the rain hides things," she said, sipping her beer, eyes glinting. I snorted, figuring she was just messing with me. But the way the forest pressed in, wet, shadowy, endless, made my skin itch. We planned to fish tomorrow, maybe hike the cliffs if the weather eased. "If it doesn't, we're still doing it," she declared, grinning. I shrugged. Her call, her rules. The wind howled louder, and I zipped my jacket tighter. Night fell fast, the kind of dark that eats your flashlight beam. The rain didn't quit, just kept hammering, and we split for our shelters, me in my tent, Lyrian in her RV. I crawled into my sleeping bag, damp and shivering, listening to the storm batter everything. It was wild out there, sure, but I liked it, felt like a challenge. Back in Missoula, I'd fixed a guy's busted radiator once in a blizzard. This was just another mess to tough out. Or so I thought. Lyrian yelled good night through the rain, and I hollered back, smirking at her dramatics. Sleep didn't come easy. The tent shook, water seeping through the seams, and my dreams were all ocean, waves swallowing me, dragging me down. I woke up once, heart racing, sure I'd heard something. A thud, heavy and close. Just the wind, I told myself, rolling over. But the rain sounded different now, sharper, like it was tapping out a warning. I ignored it, closed my eyes, and drifted off again. Big mistake. That first night was the last time I'd feel anything close to in control. Morning broke gray and wet, the rain a steady drone. I crawled out, boots sinking into mud, and glanced at Lyrian's RV. She was already up, poking at a soggy fire pit, grinning like this was normal. "Ready for some fun?" she called. I groaned but nodded, figuring we'd make the best of it. The forest loomed behind us, the ocean churned below, and something in the air felt off, like the rain was hiding more than just the sun. Morning hit like a wet slap, rain still pouring down like the sky had a personal grudge. I stumbled out of my tent, boots squishing in the mud, and my back was screaming from the lumpy ground. "Soren, you're tougher than this," I grumbled, shaking water off my jacket. Lyrian was already at it, fiddling with her RV's awning, her hair plastered to her face. "Sleep well, princess?" she teased, tossing me a granola bar. I caught it, scowling. My tent was half flooded, and the truck's windshield was a blurry mess. This trip was starting to feel less like fun and more like a test I didn't sign up for. The fire pit was a lost cause, just a soupy hole, so we huddled under her awning with coffee she'd brewed inside. "We're fishing today," Lyrian declared, like the weather wasn't a total bastard. I stared at her, rain dripping off my hood. "In this? We'll drown before we catch anything." But she just grinned, pulling out a map of the cliffs, some trail she'd found online, winding down to a rocky beach. "Come on, Soren, don't wimp out now." I wanted to bail, head inland for dry land, but her stubborn streak was contagious. So I sighed, grabbed my rod, and followed her lead. The trail was a nightmare, slick mud, roots tripping me up, and rain stinging my eyes. We trudged down toward the ocean, waves crashing loud below, and I kept slipping, cursing under my breath. Lyrian led the way, humming some dumb tune, her pack bouncing like this was a picnic. The forest was thick here, cedars dripping wet, and the air smelled like salt and rot. I was starting to think this was a bad call. Back in Missoula, I'd fished plenty, but never in a storm like this. Still, I kept going, figuring I'd humor her for an hour. We hit the beach, or what passed for one, rocks slick with seaweed, waves slamming hard enough to shake the ground. The rain turned the shore to a gray haze, and I cast my line, half blind from the downpour. Lyrian was a few yards off, laughing as she reeled in nothing but kelp. Then it happened, the first weird thing. My line snagged, hard, like something yanked it. I tugged back, thinking it was a fish, but it didn't budge, just pulled deeper, dragging my rod till the tip bent. What the hell? I muttered, cutting the line before it snapped. Lyrian didn't notice, too busy wrestling her own gear, but I couldn't shake it. That pull felt wrong, too strong. I scanned the water, squinting through the rain, and saw something. A shape, dark and big, breaking the surface for a split second before sinking. Not a seal, not a log, something else. My stomach twisted, a little nudge of something disturbing, but I brushed it off. Probably just junk, I told myself, re-rigging my line. Still, I kept one eye on the waves, that itch creeping up my spine. We fished for another half hour, caught zilch, just got wetter, and I was done. Let's head back, I called, reeling in. Lyrian pouted but agreed, and we started up the trail. That's when I saw it. A boot, half buried in the mud, laces chewed up like something had gnawed on it. I stopped, nudging it with my pole. Check this out, I said, and Lyrian crouched beside me. It wasn't old, leather still shiny, size 10, like mine. Storm wash it up? She wondered, but her voice was off, quieter. I didn't like it, felt too random, too creepy. The hike back was brutal, rain pelting us harder, and that boot stuck with me. I kept picturing some poor bastard losing it, maybe worse. Lyrian tried to lighten the mood, joking about pirate ghosts haunting the coast, but I wasn't laughing. The forest felt tighter now, branches snagging my jacket, and the ocean's roar sounded angrier, like it was chasing us. By the time we hit camp, I was soaked and edgy, the truck a muddy beacon in the gloom. We're calling it early tomorrow, I said, firm. Lyrian shrugged, but I could tell she felt it too. Something wasn't right. I crawled into my tent that night, rain drumming the nylon, and tried to shake the unease. Lyrian was in her RV, probably scrolling her phone, but I couldn't relax. That shape in the water, that boot, it was nagging me, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I told myself it was just the storm screwing with my head. Back home, I'd fixed a busted axle in a blizzard once. Shit like this shouldn't faze me. But as the wind howled and the rain kept falling, I couldn't shake the feeling we'd stumbled into something we shouldn't have. Night 2 hit hard, the rain a non-stop assault on my tent, wind rattling the poles like it wanted in. I barely slept, that boot and the weird tug on my line replaying in my head. Soren, chill out, I muttered, zipping my sleeping bag tighter, but my gut wouldn't quit twisting. Lyrian's RV glowed faintly through the storm, a little island of normal in the mess, and I almost envied her dry bed. Morning came gray and soaked, and I crawled out, boots sinking into mud that felt alive. Something was off, way off, and I couldn't pin it down yet. Lyrian was up, brewing coffee under her awning, but her usual grin was gone. You hear anything last night? She asked, handing me a mug. I frowned, sipping the scalding brew. Just the rain. What? She hesitated, then said, thought I heard splashing, like something big moving out there. I froze, that shape in the water flashing back. Probably waves, I said, but it sounded weak even to me. We ate breakfast in silence, rain drumming the tarp, and I kept glancing at the cliffs, half expecting something to crawl up from the ocean. We decided to pack up, screw fishing, screw camping. I was done with this soggy horror show. But as I started breaking down my tent, I saw it. Tracks in the mud near the truck, deep and wide, like something heavy had dragged itself through. Not boots, not tires, too messy, too big. Lyrian, get over here, I called, voice tight. She jogged over, and her face went pale. What the hell made that? She whispered. I didn't know, but it was fresh. Rain hadn't washed it out yet. My skin prickled, a scary vibe sinking in fast. We moved quick after that, tossing gear into the truck and RV. I kept my wrench handy. Dumb, maybe, but it felt better than nothing. That's when the terror hit full force. A scream ripped through the rain. Not human, not animal, something raw and wrong, echoing off the cliffs. We froze, my heart slamming, and Lyrian grabbed my arm. "That's not a damn seal," she hissed. I swung around, scanning the trees, the beach, nothing but rain and mist. Then the ground shook, a low thud thud thud, like steps coming from the shore. I bolted to the truck, yelling, "Get in your RV now." Lyrian didn't argue, sprinting to her door. I fumbled my keys, engine roaring to life, and that's when I saw it, through the windshield, blurred by rain, something massive lumbering up from the waves. Tall, hunched, covered in what looked like dripping scales, arms too long, claws glinting. My breath caught, pure horror flooding me. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a man, it was a nightmare, and it was coming straight for us. I honked, hard, signaling Lyrian to move. She peeled out in the RV, mud spraying, and I floored the truck, tires spinning before they caught. The thing let out another scream, closer, guttural, and I saw it lurch toward us in the rear view, fast despite its bulk. "Go, go, go!" I shouted, like Lyrian could hear me. The road was a slurry, trucks sliding as I fought for control, and that thing kept pace, crashing through brush like it owned the forest. My wrench slid off the seat, clattering, and I gripped the wheel, praying the rain would hide us. We hit a bend, and I lost sight of it. Thank God, but the RV's taillights flickered ahead, swerving wild. Then I heard it. A crash, metal crunching, and my stomach dropped. I sped up, rounding the turn, and there it was, Lyrian's RV off the road, nose smashed into a tree, steam hissing in the rain. She was slumped over the wheel, glass shattered, and that thing was closing in, a dark shape through the mist. I slammed the brakes, skidding, and leapt out, wrench in hand, screaming her name. She stirred, groggy, blood trickling down her face, and I yanked her door open. "Soren, what?" she mumbled, but I hauled her out, half dragging her to the truck. The thing was yards away now, its stench hitting me, rotten fish and salt, pure disturbing, and I shoved Lyrian into the passenger seat. It lunged, claws raking the RV's side with a screech, and I jumped in, slamming the gas. The truck lurched forward, mud flying, and I didn't look back, just drove, heart pounding, knowing we'd barely scraped by. I floored the truck, tires chewing mud as rain lashed the windshield, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Lyrian was slumped beside me, groaning, blood smearing her cheek from the crash. "Stay with me, liar," I barked, voice raw, glancing at her every second like she might fade out. The rear view was a blur, just rain and dark, but I knew that thing was back there, that scaly freak with claws like knives. My heart was a jackhammer, and every jolt of the truck felt like a countdown to getting ripped apart. We had to get out, now, or we were done. The road was a mess, a slick ribbon of muck winding through the forest, and the truck fishtailed hard. I wrestled the wheel, cursing as branches scraped the sides, loud as gunshots. "Where's 101?" I yelled, more to myself than Lyrian. She mumbled something, clutching her head, and pointed shakily ahead. The highway was our shot, pavement, speed, civilization, but it felt miles away, and that horror was closing in. I could still hear it, crashing, splashing, faint but too damn close through the storm. A tree loomed sudden in the headlights, fallen across the path, and I swerved, the truck sliding sideways. "Hold on," I shouted, and Lyrian braced herself as we plowed through brush, twigs snapping like bones. The tires caught again, lurching us forward, and I pushed the engine till it screamed. Back in Missoula, I'd patched trucks through worse, blizzards, floods, but this was different. This was life or death, and my toolbox wasn't going to fix it. My eyes flicked to the rear view. Nothing yet, just rain, but my gut knew better. We hit a fork, two muddy trails splitting off, and I had to guess. Left or right? I snapped. Lyrian, dazed, muttered, "Right," and I took it, praying she wasn't concussed out of her mind. The path narrowed, cliffs rising on one side, the ocean roaring below on the other. The truck bounced over rocks, suspension groaning, and then I saw it. Headlights glinting off something wet and shiny ahead. Not a car, a puddle, no, a flood, cutting the road in half. Rain had turned it into a damn river, and I slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop. "Shit, shit, shit," I hissed, staring at the water rushing across. It was deep, too deep, and the truck wasn't a boat. Lyrian sat up straighter, wincing. "Can we make it?" she croaked. I didn't know, but going back wasn't an option, not with that thing hunting us. I revved the engine, sizing it up. "Gotta try," I said, and gunned it, tires spinning before plunging in. Water surged over the hood, cold and dark, and the truck shuddered, engine choking. For a second, I thought we'd stall, trapped, sitting ducks, but it caught, clawing through, and we burst out the other side, mud spraying. That's when it hit us, literally. Something slammed the truck's tailgate, hard enough to dent metal, and Lyrian screamed. I floored it, glancing back, and there it was, that scaly bastard, lurching through the flood, eyes glinting like wet coal. It was fast, too fast, claws slashing water as it charged. "Soren, go!" Lyrian yelled, and I pushed the truck past its limit, engine howling. The road climbed, twisting up the cliff, and I took the turns blind, rain blurring everything. One slip, one drop, and we'd be over the edge, smashed on the rocks below. I saw the highway ahead, pavement, blessed pavement, and aimed for it, tires slipping on the last stretch of mud. The thing screeched behind us, a sound that curdled my blood, and I felt another thud, rocking the truck. "Hang on," I shouted, and we hit the asphalt, skidding onto 101. I didn't slow down, speedometer climbing, the ocean a dark smear on my left. Lyrian was crying now, quiet sobs, and I kept my eyes locked forward, waiting for that thing to leap out again. The rain eased a little, just a drizzle, but the terror clung like damp rot. We made it to Florence, a sleepy coastal town, and I pulled into a diner lot, truck rattling as I killed the engine. Lights glowed through the mist, people inside sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I looked at Lyrian. She was pale, shaking, but alive. The truck's tailgate was trashed, claw marks gouged deep, a scary reminder we'd barely escaped. "We're safe," I said, voice trembling, but it didn't feel true. That thing was still out there, and I couldn't shake the dread it wasn't done with us yet. The diner in Florence was a lifeline, greasy smells, buzzing fluorescents, a waitress who didn't blink at our soaked, battered selves. I sat across from Lyrian, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the steam doing nothing for the chill in my bones. She was quiet, staring at the table, a bandage from the diner's first aid kit stuck to her forehead. The truck sat outside, tailgate mangled, a horror story written in metal. "We made it," I said, trying to sound sure, but my voice cracked. Rain tapped the windows, softer now, like it was mocking us. I should have called it there, gotten Lyrian to a hospital, told the cops some half-assed story about a bear. But I didn't. She looked up, eyes hard, and said, "We can't just leave it out there, Soren. What if it follows us?" I laughed, bitter, thinking she was nuts. "Follows us? It's a damn monster, not a stalker." But she grabbed my arm, nails digging in. "You saw it. It's not normal. We need to end it." I wanted to argue, to drag her home to Missoula, but that look, fear mixed with fire, hooked me. Dumbest move I ever made. We drove back to the campsite. Yeah, back into that rainy hell, armed with my wrench and a shotgun Lyrian had stashed in her RV. The plan was shaky. Lure it out, blast it, be done. The forest was silent when we rolled in, truck crunching over mud, the RV still smashed against that tree. Rain drizzled steady, mist curling off the cliffs, and my gut screamed to turn around. "This is insane," I muttered, loading the gun. Lyrian nodded, gripping a flashlight. Better than waiting for it to find us. I couldn't argue with that logic, twisted as it was. We set up near the shore, me with the shotgun, her shining the light into the waves. The ocean churned, dark and pissed, and I yelled into the rain. "Come on, you ugly bastard." Nothing at first, just wind and water, then a splash, big and close. My heart jumped, and Lyrian swung the beam. There it was, scales glinting, claws flexing, hauling itself up the rocks. I fired, boom, pellets spraying, and it screeched, stumbling back. "Got it," I shouted, but Lyrian grabbed my arm. "It's not down, look." She was right. It shook off the hit, charging faster, a nightmare that wouldn't die. I shot again, shells clattering, but it was on us. Too close, too quick. Lyrian swung the flashlight, cracking its skull, and I rammed my wrench into its side. It roared, swiping, and caught her arm, blood spraying hot across my face. She screamed, dropping the light, and I tackled it, Pure adrenaline, smashing the wrench down. It thrashed, claws raking my leg, and I kept hitting till it went limp, a wet, scaly heap in the mud. I crawled to Lyrian, panting, but she was still. Too still. Eyes open, rain pooling in them. No, no, no. I choked, shaking her, but she was gone. I sat there, soaked and bleeding, cradling her in the dark. The thing was dead, sprawled a few feet away, but it didn't matter. I'd lost her. My cousin, my partner in this stupid trip, gone because I didn't say no. I dragged her to the truck, laid her in the back, and drove to Florence again, tears mixing with rain on my face. Cops came, took one look at the body, hers and that monster's, and called it a freak accident. Some kind of mutant, they said, but I didn't care. I'd killed it, sure, but I'd killed her too, letting her talk me into that fight. Back in Missoula now, I'm a wreck, shop's quiet, my legs scarred, and every raindrop sounds like her voice. The truck's in my garage, tailgate still busted, a constant reminder of my screw-up. I keep her flashlight on my bench, flickering sometimes like she's trying to tell me something. People say I'm a hero for taking that thing down, but they don't get it. I'm the idiot who let it take her first. That Oregon coast trip was supposed to be a break, a laugh. Instead, it's my tragedy, my ghost, and it haunts me every time the sky turns gray. I burned the tent, sold her RV, but I can't shake it. That scaly bastard's dead, but it won. Lyrian's gone, and I'm stuck here, drowning in regret, waiting for the next storm to drag me under too.